please be seated. The Board of Inquiry into the Hazelwood mine fire is now in session.
Morning, members of the Board. I'll just indicate that the first witness that I will call today is Dr Paul Torre. He's provided two statements to the inquiry in his role within the Environment Protection Authority. It's intended that evidence will be led from him and that he may be cross-examined depending on the course of that evidence. And then once that process is completed, we'll invite Ms Claire Richardson, who's the independent expert, to join Mr Torre at the expanded witness box, and then there will be a concurrent session with the two of them. It may be desirable to have a brief break while that changeover occurs. I'm in the Board's hands as to whether that would be desirable or not. Perhaps we'll play it by ear. All right. I'll call Dr Paul Torre.
Please state your full name.
Paul Torre.
Please repeat after me. I do solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm
I do solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
to this Board of Inquiry
will
be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Morning, Dr Torre. For the purpose of the transcript, can you please state your full name?
My name's Paul Torre.
You hold the position of Team Leader of Analysis and Predictions within the Victorian Environment Protection Authority.
Yes, that's in the assessment and predictions team, sorry.
Sorry, say that again. Team Leader.
Of the assessment and predictions team.
Assessment and Predictions. Thank you. Dr Torre, for the purposes of the inquiry, you've made two witness statements.
Yes, I have.
Can I ask you about those in turn? Firstly, you provided a statement to the inquiry, did you not, dated the 14th of May 2014?
Yes, I did.
Do you have a copy of the two statements? They should be in the folder in front of you.
Yes.
Did you have an opportunity to read through the two statements before coming to the inquiry today?
Yes, I did.
I think I said it was dated the 14th. I'm looking at an earlier copy. I think it's the 16th of May. Is that right?
Yes.
Sorry to mislead you. Are the contents of that statement true and correct?
Yes, but there is one correction
Yes,
that I'd like to have.
Certainly.
It's in Table 3.
So that's page 3 of the statement.
The assessment criteria should be micrograms per cubic metre rather than part per billion. Apologise for that typo.
Sorry, is that for all of the entries?
Yes, so wherever there is part per billion, it should be micrograms per cubic metre.
Okay, so if we start, for example, with aluminium, I won't go through each of them, but instead of it saying 2 parts per billion, it should say 2 micrograms.
Now, Table 3, I've got 38.
This bit shouldn't be difficult, but it seems it's going to be. So we're looking at the same thing. Table 3, the first entry is aluminium.
Yes, yes.
We've got averaging period yearly. Then working off the 16th of May statement, Table 3, first entry aluminium, currently 38 parts per billion, is that right?
Yes.
And you would change parts per billion to read microgram per cubic metre.
Yes.
And wherever we see parts per billion, you would seek to make that change.
Yes.
With those changes being made, and that's just in Table 3,
Yes.
is the statement otherwise true and correct?
Yes.
I'll tender the statement of the 16th of May 2014.
Exhibit number.
I think it's 38, sir.
38.
Now, Dr. Torre, before leaving that statement, the reason I say we'll leave it is because the subject matter of that statement is the subject of a joint report that you have produced with an independent expert that's been retained by the inquiry, Ms. Claire Richardson.
Yes.
Yes, and so rather than asking you as an individual about those matters, we'll return to the matters that you deal with there, the standards and the like. But before doing that, I'd like to just ask you a little bit about your background, if I could, please. Paragraph 3 of that statement, you say that you hold a PhD in applied science air pollution. Can you tell the inquiry what the subject matter of your doctorate was?
My doctorate was an analysis of volatile organic compounds in Melbourne Air.
And you also hold a graduate diploma in analytical chemistry as well as a Bachelor of Science in chemistry. You haven't attached a CV to your statement. Would it be possible for you to provide that to the inquiry, please?
Yes, I will.
In terms of your employment with the Environment Protection Authority, goes back a while to 1985.
Yes, it does.
And have you held different positions within the EPA in that time?
Yes, I have. Several positions.
Could you tell us briefly what those positions have been, please?
Started off as a junior scientific officer, then worked as a senior scientific officer, then worked as a team leader in the land and in the wastewater area. I then team leader for the air chemistry group, then moved over to the air quality assessment group, and there's been a couple of restructures in the EPA, and I'm to the current role as team leader in assessments for air quality and predictions.
As you say in paragraph 2 of his statement, in your current role you manage a group of scientists and technicians who undertake a number of such assessments of air quality. Is that right?
Yes, I do.
I'll ask you a little bit about the resources that you have within your group. How many full-time equivalent qualified air quality specialists do you have in your group?
In my team, I
Yes.
have three full-time air quality scientists. We have also got a...
So is that including yourself or in addition to yourself?
On the 4.
Right. Sorry, I cut you off.
Yep. We've also got also a program leader who oversees. So the way it's structured is I have got there's four in my team. We also have an air monitoring group where there's another 5 people and a couple of contractors, which has been overseen by an air quality program leader.
And those figures that you've just given us there, that's currently, as at the beginning of June 2014, were they the same as at the 9th of February when the Hazelwood mine fire started, or have those numbers...
No, they were the same.
Okay. What about if we go back 5 years? Were you in the same position at about the time of the Black Saturday fires in February 2009? Sorry, you personally, were you managing that team?
I was in a similar team.
Yes.
Team where there was a little bit of... yes, it was a similar team.
Okay. And how do the numbers now compare to 5 years ago? Has there been a change in the numbers, either increased or decreased, or are they the same?
In terms of concentrations?
In terms of the resources you just described to the inquiry that are available to you, have they changed in that time?
I suspect they're very close. They're probably, no, I think there was probably a few more people. Yes, there was about probably 3 or 4 more people.
Right.
To understand that, 3 or 4, 5 years ago than you have now. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, there was, sorry, I just got to recall.
Yes, yeah.
Probably be about, I think there probably another 3 or 4 scientists that were in the group.
Yes.
Air quality scientists that no longer have their role in our team.
So can I just ask, why the reduction?
Oh, it's the priorities that the organisation has. The environment's got a lot of challenges. Generally what we're finding is that the air quality in Melbourne and Victoria, the levels are reasonably good. We most of the time meet the air quality objective. So it's looking at trying to maximise our effort because there's a lot of contaminated land, water, obviously the regulatory role that we're doing. So it's the way the organisation restructures and reforms to meet the demands.
So would you say you have sufficient air quality scientists now?
That's a good question. Personally?
Personally, yeah.
I think that we've just lost one, so it'd be good to replace the air quality scientist. I think what we try to do is do the best we can with the resources we have.
So just one final question. Compared, say, to New South Wales, would you have a similar complement of scientists in Victoria?
Oh, no, New South Wales are a different... they have a much greater air monitoring network system, and they've just gone through a restructure themselves. And I suspect that they would have significantly more numbers, just because they run a larger network. But I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, so. But yeah, they would be significantly bigger.
Is that because they have significantly more industrial areas?
Yes, and I think they've...
Or mining, or both?
Well, to be parochial, they've got more air pollution problems than we have. Especially in Sydney itself, they've got quite a number of issues with ozone. They've obviously got the issues with the mines and coal. So the Hunter Valley, Lower Hunter Valley. So and I think that's been a key issue for them to try to reduce a lot of those impacts.
Thank you.
Thank you. I can turn then to the second statement that you provided to the inquiry. It's a statement dated the 30th of May 2014. Have you had a read through that statement before coming along today?
Yes, I have.
And are the contents of that statement true and correct?
Yes.
Will include those a separate exhibit or part of 38?
I think it'll be part of 38. I'll tender that as Exhibit 38, part of it. Just a little bit about the background to this, because this is one of the few unsolicited statements that have come into the inquiry. Dr. Torre, you provided this to us of your own volition, is that right?
Yes, I did.
Explain to us what the reason was for doing that.
Well, it was really that I was at the event from the beginning,
yes.
In terms of from an EPA response, and it would have been informative to share my experiences and some of the rationale behind some of the events. Because I did, when the executive team did ask me to go down to the Regional Control Centre in Traralgon, I was there as a scientific officer and supporting the emergency response.
As you say in your second statement, paragraph 2, you've given some thought to the context in which your first statement dated the 16th of May was made to the inquiry, and you'd like to set out the context of the air monitoring and assessment undertaken by EPA since it first became involved in response to the fire.
Yes.
That summarise the rationale for providing it. And I should indicate to you the inquiry is grateful because it wasn't immediately apparent from your first statement the personal role that you had in relation to the events down here. So it's been of great assistance to us to have your second statement. I want to ask you some questions about your role And you may be aware that whilst your former boss, Mr. Merritt, was in the witness box yesterday, he sent a few handballs your way about matters that he thought we might be better asking you, and so I'll address those too, if that's convenient to you, Dr. Torre.
That was kind of it.
Yeah, of course. There's been a bit of that going on in this inquiry, so you're not alone there, Dr. Torre. We start at paragraph 3 of your statement, please. The first day that you attended in the Latrobe Valley in relation to this matter was the 12th of February, so that's day 3 of the fire.
Yes.
The Wednesday of what we're referring to as the first week. Is that right?
Yes.
The Wednesday.
Yes.
And how is it that you came to have come down to the valley? Who asked you to come down?
Yeah, I attended the executive management team meeting that was actually being done at McLeod. I'm based at McLeod at the Centre of Environmental Science.
Yes.
And
this was an EPA
yeah.
management team.
Yes.
Yes.
And they asked me that the incident at the Morwell Hazelwood mine was underway, and they needed to get some support from EPA.
Yes.
So they asked me to go down as a scientific officer to help with the incident.
As you say in paragraph 3, the role of the science officer was to provide scientific support to the emergency incident and was rotated amongst other trained scientists at the EPA as the incident continued. So you were one of several scientists who fulfilled that role during the course of the incident.
Yes, as a scientific officer.
I understand.
In saying that too, there was a team of scientists back at McLeod providing support across whole sectors of the environment.
Amongst other things, they were there interpreting the data that was fed back to them from the various monitoring stations?
Yes, and other scientists, the other freshwater scientists or contaminated ground scientists. So it was very much a coordinated team approach.
Yes, yep. Now, paragraph 4, you say something which may seem surprising at first blush, and I want to ask you about it. You talk about your area of expertise, and then in the last line of paragraph 4 you say EPA has very limited air monitoring equipment for measuring air emissions from emergency incidents. Would you like to expand on that, please, Dr. Torre?
Yes, well, EPA really is not, in terms of the air quality program, it's not designed to do emergency rapid response air monitoring for emergency incidents.
Yes.
The air monitoring program is more about trying to assess the impacts to air quality in a general issue. And there is projects where we try to understand the trends of pollution, but there's also projects where we might go out there and do short-term, issue-specific campaign air quality assessments, and monitoring is obviously a way of doing that. But we try to use every tool we can. So we're not really geared up, or our role isn't in this emergency response space. We do provide as much support as we can. But what we do is we're not in that rapid response capability.
Does that mean, therefore, this was, in your experience, a somewhat unusual role for you to play?
I've been in the emergency response system for several years.
Yes.
In terms of providing scientific advice, yes. In terms of the air monitoring assessment and network that we do, in terms of emergency incident, yes, very unusual.
I know from the joint report that you've produced with Ms Richardson that this is one of the recommendations that you make, is it not, about the need to develop more in the way of a rapid response capability?
Yes, I very much strongly support that.
Yeah, and that recommendation, which we'll come back to, and I don't want to steal your thunder at this stage, but that's very much informed by your experience of this event. Is that right?
Yes, oh, very much.
Right. Now, paragraph 5 of your statement, you referred to it being customary when responding to emergency incident for EPA air quality experts to conduct an initial impact assessment. Can you explain to us what that means?
Now, I think it's trying to understand what would be the impact, where are the emissions going, what type of emissions, what type of event it is. And and how would you try to measure those impacts? Are there any viable methods that could be employed? It depends on the incident. So you might turn up and it might be a chemical spill.
Yes.
And you'd be looking for vapours, or, and as in this case here, it was a fire.
Yes.
So you're looking for what are the major pollutants, what are the pollutants of concern, and how would you go about trying to assess that?
Do you also need to factor in any nearby population areas?
That's
it goes without saying.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's all right.
Yeah, obviously, where you're looking for where the impacts are.
Yes, yeah.
And if it's residential people, it might be, sometimes it may be, depending on the pollutant, it might be even a catchment. You may have things dropping into a catchment which may affect it, so yes.
And your initial impact assessment here told you that north and northeast of the fire was the town of Morwell.
Yes.
And that the southern reaches of the town of Morwell were very close, within several hundred metres of the northern batters, which were well and truly on fire when you arrived.
Yes.
Can I just qualify that by raising the query whether you could, on the maps that we've been provided, suggest that it's close to 400 to 500 metres between the bowling club, which of course is relevant for what you're doing, and the area that was still burning at the time that you were there?
Yes.
Was it also part of the initial impact that the town of Morwell was going to be particularly affected by smoke from the fire, dependent on the wind direction?
Yes.
That would have been immediately apparent to you.
Yes.
And in particular, southwesterly winds were going to potentially have the greatest impact on the distribution of smoke through Morwell?
Yes. Can I just add on that? When I did drive down that weekend, I drove down on the 12th on the Wednesday. There was quite a lot of smoke impact. The East Gippsland bushfires were blowing smoke across the southern part of Victoria, where the bushfires in Bendigo, the northern parts of Melbourne. So there's quite a lot of smoke around. And I distinctly remember driving through Yarragon and other towns. Just the saturation of smoke, the visibility was poor. And we'd already been alerted to the general bushfires because our air quality forecasting team were actually looking at satellite photos and you can actually see the size of the plume and the amount of smoke. And so on the 11th we already started to think of issuing advisories and following the processes. So pretty much evident in terms of the smoke everywhere.
Yes. So whatever smoke was coming out of the mine was over and above the general level of smoke that might have been present in the region. And what was your initial assessment of the level of smoke in the town of Morwell when you arrived? Because we've heard differing views about that during the course of the inquiry. You're on the spot. What was your assessment?
Yeah, there was a lot of smoke around, but it was, at the time, I thought it was difficult to distinguish between the background smoke and the mine smoke. And I recall, I think the winds were mainly an easterly wind. We weren't, I could see smoke coming from the mine, but there was generally smoke around the place.
I should probably have taken you to this. In paragraph 8 of your statement, you do talk about the assessments you'd made before coming to Morwell, that is on the 10th and the 11th, and your awareness of the general poor quality of the air and the smoke advisories. The aerial resources, you make reference to, and I think you just told us there that EPA has the ability to examine smoke plumes. Can you tell us a little bit what that facility is that you're talking about?
That's generally available to everyone. There's satellite images that you can download, and we look at that as a way of trying to understand the impact across a large area. It really, not only does it give you an understanding of the spatial variability of the impact, but it also gives you an understanding of the intensity of the smoke. Because some of these plumes, you can see they look like enormous clouds.
Yes.
And that provides us the information for the forecasters with measurements and observations to put some context about those impacts.
Paragraph 8 of your statement, you describe your immediate assessment that you made, and I take it that was made after you... did you go and have a look at the mine?
I stood at the side of the road.
Yes.
We drove around. We had a look at the mine. I did drive around to the back of the mine just
Yes.
to see whether there was any more smoke going west of the mine and also south of the mine, just to try to could see the plumes coming out.
Yes.
I think the thing that struck me the most was how big the mine was.
Yes.
And the smoke coming out.
I think you wouldn't be alone in this room in having reached that view once you had a look at the mine, but also the amount of smoke coming out of the fire. And it was apparent to you, I take it, that there was fire burning in several areas of the mine?
Yes, and you could see different plumes, and you could see the smoke going, dispersing away.
Were you alone in making this assessment, or were you part of a group of people?
No, I consulted the team. I think one of the things about trying to undertake an air monitoring program is to consult and try to get as much resource available. And so the night before we started to think about, well, if we need to be mobilising and we need to get an assessment, what's the best way to start mobilising and deploying equipment for monitoring? So we started a whole series of events. With emergency response events, you tend to go to rapid mobile monitoring systems that you can apply close to an incident.
Yes.
So that we started to try to obtain or purchase or rent an instrument that will be able to give us, because we knew it was smoke, we needed to measure particles, focus being on PM2.5, because it penetrates in our lungs, it affects our health, etc. So that was the main focus. How can we get monitors down there to understand the impacts?
Yes.
But I think what's important too is that the level of smoke around the place and the advisors and people understanding that hopefully through the communications that smoke is evident and we need to take account of those potential impacts.
Yes.
So it was all about how do we mobilise. Fortunately, what happened was we were in the process of putting a particular monitor, measure PM2.5 in Traralgon.
Can I just stop you there? Up until that time, the monitor at Traralgon had only measured PM10. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so you were in the process of upgrading that, were you? And when was that intended to take effect? That is, that the Traralgon monitor would have the capacity to monitor 2.5 as well as PM10.
Yeah, that was in that week or so, I believe.
Right.
So it was kind of, we were working towards putting the PM2.5 monitor in Traralgon.
Yep. What does that involve logistically? Is it augmenting the existing equipment, or is it putting in new equipment?
Oh no, it's putting new equipment,
right.
putting in the shelves, fitting that in. One of the challenges is the making sure it's a data acquisition system. So the instrument measures the pollutant, it then transfers that measurement into a system that's able to collect it and then transmit that to a computer, so then we can take the data, or eventually, if we either put it on our website,
yes,
and analyse the data. So you've got that continual stream of data.
Okay. So I think I cut you off. You told us that one of the things you were aware of as part of your assessment before coming to Morwell, and once you got here, was that there were steps in train to upgrade the Traralgon monitoring equipment so that it could measure PM2.5.
Yeah, so we were thinking about, well, how do we, trying to access equipment to go down there, what's the best way to get something operating? So the monitoring team were looking at all those options.
Yes.
And that option was one that was available to us.
Are you coming back to this question of the Tasmanian materials?
I was about to go there, but
Well,
now would be a good
Ask
time.
your questions and I'll add them if necessary.
All right. You mention in paragraph 9 of your statement that the science team in Melbourne had organised the hire of some equipment. Do you want to just expand on that? What equipment was sought? You refer to the dust track equipment. Can you tell us a little bit about the dust track equipment, please?
Yes, the dust track equipment is a device that uses a light scattering measurement technique where basically the air from the atmosphere goes into it. A light measures the amount of light that the detector can read.
Yes.
And that's basically proportional to light scattering to the amount of particles in the atmosphere. So there's a size selective inlet, so it basically cuts off particles that are PM2.5. That goes into the detector. There's a response that's relating to that light measurement, and it's there's a couple of factors that it's really good at. It's portable. This particular system has also got an ability to log and send data into remotely, and it gives you that ability to be able to apply it where we need. There's also a lot of work done in Tasmania. The reason that we actually contacted Tasmanians was that the Tasmanian EPA done quite a lot of work in this area using dust tracks for smoke. It's an area what we call a monopollutant area, that you've got one source of smoke. You can get the instrument, even though it's not directly for particles, you could come up with a measurement that estimates PM2.5.
Right.
So just inquire as to the reason why Tasmania would decide to spend the money in getting that kind of equipment?
Well, I think it's part of their air monitoring network. So the Tasmanians decided that, which is right, is that their main pollutant is smoke from wood heaters and burning from bush. So they needed a network where they could cover those places in other parts of Tasmania that could do that monitoring. What they did find was that because smoke is a prevalent pollutant, they were able to use these more portable instruments rather than the conventional air monitoring network to come up with, they do a whole lot of calibration. So when you do air monitoring for an air monitoring network, you've got to make sure you meet certain standards. And even though this piece of equipment isn't a standard method, they were able to demonstrate scientifically that it was sound enough for their air monitoring network. And for their needs, it suited their requirements. So that the dust track, I mean, for us it was about where can we get a piece of equipment as soon as possible and we could deploy.
Yes.
We could.
So, no, finish off. I was going to ask you then about the traffic blanket, but finish off what you're going to say.
So we went around as many places as we could. We could only get one dust track to begin with, and then ring around and we get a second dust track later on. We were looking for any type of instrument we could use that our guys were comfortable with. The travel blanket, I think the blanket is a very nice name. It's something to talk about the baseline ambient network of Tasmanian EPA, something T. And the travel blanket is because this device is mobile, the guy that created the system called it's a travel blanket because it's the same instrument they use in the blanket network. So what they've done is got a blanket network at the top of Tasmania and other areas to monitor these smoking packs. And so Dr. John Innes here from the Tasmanian EPA had come up with this portable device where you could put into a car and drive around and look at smoke. What it would do was it would go into areas where there'd be a lot of wood heaters in small towns and just demonstrate the impact of smoke, the way people were burning their heaters. He would come up with this. So he came up with a way of visually illustrating those concentrations. Now, there's limitations in the equipment in terms of the measurement and what you get out of it, but they do provide you an indication of the level of particles for a short period of time. It doesn't mean standard, but it also gives you a good understanding of how the smoke's travelling, where it is. And you can see in valleys the way it gets trapped. So it's a good way of illustrating that, and it was a way of trying to talk to residents about the way that they were burning heaters and providing evidence to change behaviour to get better air quality.
It's probably just me, but the reference to the blanket, I think we all understand the travel idea that it's portable. It sticks out of a car and you go around. The reference to the blanket.
It's the acronym. It's the.
Oh, okay.
It's Dr. John Innes who created this acronym. I can't remember exactly. It's something to do with baseline air network of, that's the K.
Yep.
EPA Tasmania.
Right. Okay.
Oh, he's really creative.
You've helped us solve one mystery, Dr. Torre, and we are very grateful for that.
Really, what's interesting is when John first came along, I met John, came into the air monitoring game a few years ago. I actually got an email from him saying, when they established the blanket, saying that our smoke from Victoria was impacting on Tasmania. What are you doing about it? Right. I said we'd like to share our resources with you. But, so the blanket, it's been a very, I've been very impressed that the system is developed in there.
Okay. And I take it that both the dust track equipment and the travel blanket were of considerable assistance to you in fulfilling your role at the Hazelwood mine.
Fortunately, John's, I contacted John on the way down. So on the way down, we hired a dust track. We needed to understand what sort of calibration figures we needed to adjust the instrument to give us something that gave us estimates of PM2.5.
Yes.
And John straight away said, yes, I'll start. So we started having John in the loop on that first day.
This is the gentleman from EPA Tasmania.
Sorry,
yes. And can you give us ballpark figures? What sort of money are we talking about if one wanted to buy just the dust track monitor, one dust track monitor that you used? Give us an idea of what we're talking about.
I'm not sure. $5,000 to $10,000. $10,000 maybe.
Okay.
15. Oh, sorry, I don't get into purchases of equipment, but I think it's in that order.
Right.
And I think that's the idea about the dust track system. It's whether it's when you get the fully blown system, it may be $20,000.
Yes.
I'm not sure, but it gives you the ability to have a number of sensors, so you can get that spatial variation.
Yes.
So it's portable, low cost, relative to actually it might be less than 10,000. I'm not sure. Relative to a standard ambient air monitor.
Now, we've heard some references. Mr. Merritt yesterday was talking about the need to get indicative data which may be less than perfect to inform the initial stages of the emergency response. Can you explain to us what that means? What's the difference? What is indicative data? What's the difference from what's it contrasted with in terms of more reliable data?
So in an emergency event, it's really about trying to get an indication of what the levels are.
Yes.
Just, how is the incident going? How can we stop those emissions and control it? So the indicative data is basically a measurement which is not a standard method used for the conventional ambient air quality. It doesn't meet the high standard, but there is enough information and correlations to put the equipment together to come up with a way that they're very close. So there's kind of like an uncertainty. So you adjust the data to give you estimates of PM2.5
Right.
rather than using that conventional method.
And drawing on your training experience, you're confident that the dust track equipment once installed at Morwell South was providing data that was accurate enough for it to inform the response by the emergency personnel?
Yeah, well, one of the challenges of the dust track data is it did give us information. It told us, it supported what we were seeing, high levels of particles. One of the challenges with the dust track data was that the calibrations that the Tasmanians had done was with wood smoke. And we were still wanting to get a little bit more calibration in terms of, is the coal particles and reacting to this instrument the same as the wood smoke? So, yeah, but it did provide very good information because we could use that against other similar measurements like the visibility reduction.
Yes.
So we've got a number of different monitors that we use, and what our guys are very good at is doing some statistical analysis to come up with that indicative data.
You raised something which I was going to come to, but I'll do it now, and that is the challenge that you faced in dealing with the coal smoke as compared to bushfire smoke. And of course in Victoria there are quite well established protocols for the measurement of bushfire smoke, and you refer to those in your statement. What are the differences between the smoke that was coming out of the mine fire as compared to bushfire smoke?
Well, when I refer to the difference in this particular situation, it's more to do with the way the instrument is actually responding relative to the standard method of monitoring. There'd be differences in terms of some of the combustion products, but generally what we tend to look for is the major pollutants of concern. So we're looking for particles.
And those particles are present in both bushfire smoke and coal mine smoke?
All combustion.
All combustion. Now, paragraph 19 of your statement, you tell us that you confirmed on the 13th, so on the second day you were in Morwell, that the bowling club was an appropriate location to install the dust track monitor. Can you explain to us your rationale for using the bowling club?
So we wanted a station that was going to give us high concentration, high impact area, which was going to be representative of that community and residential area in there. But we also needed a spot which was generally open. This is just common conventional air monitoring. So the idea was to give us something that's close to the residents, it's close to the mine, it's open, and gives us a general representation of those high impact areas.
A map of Morwell's come up there, and the bowling club is at the end of Hazelwood Road. So that's about the location, isn't it? And we can just see from looking at that map why you thought that was an appropriate location, given that the mine is just south of that position on the other side of the freeway.
Yes.
As you say in paragraph 19, it was just about as close to the fire as it was possible to have a monitoring site, as there was an available tract of land next door. What sort of land area do you need to set up equipment like that in?
It really depends on what you're trying to do.
Yes.
We're trying to get something that's representative, something that's really open. Like the bowling green was really good. We like to go to places like open football grounds or spaces like that, because one of the factors is you're trying to get a general representation of that area, and when you're in sort of in located spots, you may be not getting that general representative area. So a football ground or is commonly used. Even a bowling green like that is really good for it.
And probably a dumb question, but does the equipment need to be in an elevated position to take readings?
There's a standard height that it comes into, so it's generally just below breathing zone.
Right.
And so that's just deployed that way.
Okay. And one last question about the dust track equipment. It was obviously capable of measuring PM 2.5 and PM 10, I think you've told us. Is that right? Or just PM 2.5?
No, just PM 2.5.
Just PM 2.5. What about PM 1.0, that is even smaller particles?
No, yes, I mean, normally there is PM1, there's ultrafines, there's a whole lot of different particles. And we focus on PM 2.5 because it's readily, it can be readily measured. There's advisory standards. There's a lot of research on health impacts. There's equipment that's readily available and portable, and those lower particles are part of that PM 2.5.
Sorry, Dr. Torre, your statement just then was that there's very well-known health impacts on PM 2.5. How long has that been well-known, and what's the source of that data?
Just looking at the research, there's overseas. There's been quite a number. Recently, in 2013, there was quite a big study done an overview done in Europe, and I think it's in America, looking at the impacts of PM 2.5. There's been quite a lot of stuff done. This is not my area of expertise, but quite a lot of epidemiological studies on yearly data on PM 2.5, and a lot of the work's focused in PM 2.5.
So it would be quite common. It is quite common knowledge that PM 2.5 is a health risk. It impacts people's health.
It depends. I mean, it's a PM 2.5. It's like most pollutants. We all have different sensitivities and different concentration, and the literature's all over the place in terms of how it affects people. And you've got sensitive people who are ill or people young. So there's a number of different ways that it can affect it. And for healthy people, for some, it's just different sensitivity. But there is literature saying it does affect people's health.
Thank you.
The recent report that you referred to, is that the one that you draw our attention to in your first statement, the review of evidence on health aspects of air pollution? That's in paragraph 22. We don't need to go to that, but that's the reference that you're talking about. Thank you.
And there's also a Senate inquiry recently. I'm looking at particles PM 2.5.
Yes. Now, the other pollutant I want to ask you about is carbon monoxide. You make reference in paragraph 14 of your second statement to becoming aware on the 12th, on the first day that you were here, of some reported carbon monoxide readings from the mine. You say that on the basis of that, you advised your science team to also hire some handheld carbon monoxide monitors and to identify portable carbon monoxide equipment.
Yes, so we needed to understand if there was going to be any dispersion into the town. So just try to get as much equipment as we can. Ideally, we were looking also for, if possible, any carbon monoxide analysers. They were a bit like an analyser that you may use as a dust trap.
Yes.
Something that's portable, that can average the results, that can then transmit that result, so use for data analysis. But we didn't have any luck in that space.
Okay. Well, firstly, you obviously look to resources the EPA might itself have had? I take it you didn't have any of that
No,
sort
no,
of equipment?
no. Like I say, our air monitoring program is pretty much focused on our air monitoring network, and we do have standard monitors that we use to assess against ambient air quality objectives.
Yes. And you were able to access some handheld CO monitors, were you not?
Yes.
Okay. And that was over and above the equipment that the CFA and the MFB were using at the mine, is that right?
Yes. Yes. So the CFA have got their own system for their occupational health and safety.
Yes.
They've got a system called an area array system.
That's
And-
Area RAE,
Yeah.
is that right?
And array, R-A-E.
Yes.
So that's the brand name.
Yes.
So it's a really useful system in that it's able to a number of satellite detectors, and they've got a polling computer in the middle, and that sends it back to that computer, and you can see the concentration. And they were using that in the mine at various spaces places to understand the levels of CO.
That their firefighters were being exposed to.
Firefighters, and
Yes.
they also had one also, I think, from memory, at the security guard when you get into the staging area.
Yes.
They had one out there too, I believe. So and so they had them located around the place.
All right. You gave them some advice or made a recommendation to them about where one such monitor could be located. Can you explain why you gave that advice?
So on the 13th, I went down to the staging area down at the...
Just get a map of the mine up. Might assist you. The staging area was near the power station, was it not? Near the main gate, is it right?
There was a stage... in the early pieces, the staging area was actually near the mine itself.
Are you able to identify, looking at that, the general area we're talking about?
I think it might have been somewhere here.
Right, so you're pointing to the northern part of the mine.
Yeah, there was an initial staging, and let's see if I can correct me.
Yes.
From memory, because you sort of drive in, but it was very close to the mine, so I could actually walk on the edge of the mine within 30 or 40 metres at the top there somewhere.
The gridded map.
I suggest that we might use
Yes, I was about
the map that's now been prepared by GDF. I don't think we've got it.
We don't have it on the system,
I don't
apparently.
think we've got it in electronic form at the moment, but at least it does have a grid
Yes.
from A to V and 1 to 16, and so if we could just have you give it the grid reference.
Yeah, I suppose it looks like that spot where it says fire service, the green dot.
Fire service and RTL, is that what you're referring to?
I think so.
And is it the green dot above the word service or under the letter C? Can you be that precise or not really?
It's roughly L5 anyway.
It's
L5.
in the vicinity of L5.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so but that's all right. Thank you, Dr. Torre. And is that the location that you refer to in paragraph 17 of your statement as being a place where the area RAE monitor should be located? Just trying to make that connection between that location and what you're talking about.
No, sorry, that location was where the staging area was, where I first saw the area arrays.
Yes.
So when I got to that staging area, that's where the firefighters were coming in, getting their CO testing before that, and they were actually going down to fight it. When I went in there that morning, they had a number of area arrays that weren't being used. So because it's a manual system, sorry, I'm going back to explain.
Sure, no, it's very helpful.
And they had a manual system where they have a technician or a firefighter that actually monitors the concentration of CO.
Yes.
So that when they've got different sites around the mine, they can understand those concentrations and then take action as the levels increase. They had a number of area arrays that weren't being used. And so at the time I asked I think the commander was in charge and the MFB scientific officer at the time, Craig Tompkins, if it would be possible to actually deploy some of those area arrays that weren't being used for various reasons. You know, there was problems with smoke and vehicles and transmission of data, they could deploy them around some of the spots around the perimeter of the mine.
Right.
Just to give us an indication if we're getting any plumes of carbon monoxide from the mine to the township.
Right. So you were looking at a way of using equipment that they brought down to deal with firefighter safety as a way of monitoring for the community.
And we do that in emergency response incidents.
Yes.
We collaborate. The scientific officers, the fire brigade, at an incident, we all work together.
Yes.
And it would not be uncommon to work with the fire brigade to try to understand an impact assessment. Sometimes it's even the fire brigade are used to identify, dust that we don't know. So, it's always working together to try to use the resources the best way.
Now, paragraph 17 of your statement, you say you liaised with the CFA, recommended that the area rays be strategically placed, one at the mine perimeter to enable worst-case scenario readings. Does that mean there was one unit placed or several?
Oh, I left it to the fire brigade.
Right.
I just said if you could deploy monitors out there, because one of the things you need to do when you deploy the area ray, you've got to make sure that it's in a location where it can send the signal back to the polling computer.
Yes.
So there's a limitation distance. So they need to determine that. But the point is, if they know the objective, it's trying to get an understanding of the smoke coming off the site, they then they applied that. Because what I was talking to them about was we didn't have any monitors that we could do that in Morwell, because
Yes.
we were doing some spot checks.
Okay.
Because at the time we thought that the carbon monoxide was confined to the actual mine.
Right. But you wanted to do some monitoring
As a
to
precaution.
see. Yes. Are you able, by reference to the gridded map that's in front of you, to indicate where the area rays were placed after that discussion?
No, because by that time I'd left the site.
Right.
And gone to try to find the bowling club to actually start to deploy the dust track.
Okay, I understand. Now, paragraph 23 is in relation to carbon monoxide monitoring. You refer to the use of handheld monitors at specific locations. I take it that's on the 13th of February, the following day? The second day you were there? And where did that equipment come from to enable that monitoring to be done?
We hired that equipment from a company that specialises in occupational health and safety monitoring.
Yes.
Called AirMed Scientific, and they provided these two monitors that people wear on there for monitoring CO during workplace.
Right. And so they were used by EPA officers?
Yeah, the idea there was we had put people in the field that could go out there and do some spot tests just to give us an indication of what the CO measurements were.
And you chose the facilities that you've identified there because that's where particularly vulnerable groups
And so,
would be.
the general advice is try to select areas where we had those sensitive residents, but also general areas where people are, just to give us an idea. But it was important to make sure that it was over that area, so over a large area, so we could get an indication of spatial variation. So pretty much left it to the field people to go out there and start doing some measurements.
All right. Do you know if the readings, the records of those measurements have been provided to the inquiry, those carbon monoxide readings?
I don't think so. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'll have to refer.
If you could, please. Yeah. Paragraph 24, you say that those initial steps that you'd taken, that is the installation of the dust track at the bowling club, the carbon monoxide monitoring that was being done with the handheld monitors, and the use of the area ray equipment at the mine, enabled you to put together a preliminary picture of air quality in Morwell. What did the preliminary picture look like?
It's also worth adding that we were also commissioning the Morwell East monitoring station.
Yes, tell us about that.
Yeah. So generally, the approach was to have a three-tiered approach in terms of trying to do air quality. We wanted to have something that focused on the high impact, that gave us a fixed site that gave us the amount of particles. We also wanted something that was mobile, if we could, just to understand the extent. Are we looking at the right pollutants? But we also needed to have something, which is, I suppose, been debating about Morwell East, because we wanted something that's going to give us an understanding of general concentrations in the general Morwell area, where most of the people were as well. So we wanted to get that full picture.
Right. And you identified that the recently decommissioned site at Morwell East could be recommissioned to assist you. Is that right?
Yeah, that was there once the team had identified it and thought that was the best, the quickest way we could get equipment into the monitor. They went ahead and did that. I mean, we weren't getting CO. I mean, the focus is really much on particles. There was advisories there. I mean, it's all about smoke, and the advisories trying to get people's attention that smoke, elevated levels of smoke, you know, the less you can see in distance, the higher the level of particles are like, the more smoke there is. Really need to start taking, take that into account and precaution. So I think the advisories and that information was key as well as the monitoring, because one of the issues about monitoring, you can't monitor everywhere. So we need to be cognizant of smoke and potential impacts.
You refer in a couple of places, and I'm talking about carbon monoxide, to there being no elevated readings or significant readings of carbon monoxide. What do those terms mean? Against what standard? What were you judging the carbon monoxide levels against?
Well, we weren't really using a standard. It was really an exploratory number. We were trying to work out what if there was carbon monoxide.
Yes.
What levels they were. What we did find was there was very little. You'd get 1 or 2 part per million. We did occasionally get a 15 part per million, but it was instantaneous. It would sort of, you get a read and it'd be gone. So it was more about trying to understand. I mean, in an emergency incident, it's really about what are the levels and how can we stop those emissions to get to those levels. It's indicative numbers that we can try to work with.
And I think I may have cut you off. You started telling us about what that preliminary picture that was emerging. Focusing on PM 2.5, what were the initial readings that you were getting from the dust track telling you about the general level of PM 2.5 at the bowling club?
Yeah, they were elevated. I think the numbers, we were still trying to digest the numbers and we were waiting for the Morwell East data to come along.
Yes.
We were seeing some impacts, but I think during that period of time, I think the impacts might have been more from the bushfires, because I think there were easterlies and, from memory, easterlies and northeasterlies.
Yes.
So we were seeing smoke.
Those early records, the records from the dust track monitoring that occurred at the Morwell South Bowling Club, do you know if those records have been provided to the inquiry?
I believe so. So yeah, so the dust track data is what we call estimated PM 2.5.
Yes.
And they should have been, I believe, reported.
Just excuse me a moment.
Well, we can always.
We're just checking. There's a bit of a degree of confusion about where that material is and the form that it's in, but your understanding is it's been provided to the inquiry.
I believe so.
All right, we'll further investigate.
I wonder if I could just ask, so in terms of those early PM 2.5 readings, I mean, you said they were elevated. Can you, from memory, give us a bit more information? Of course, this is terribly important in terms of any consequential health advice to the community, and we understand what the levels were from around the 20th of February, but it's these early periods when the fire was very intense in terms of those PM 2.5 readings, and particularly whether you were passing on that information to the Department of Health.
So the levels weren't. We had an event, I believe, on the 13th that we put down to, but that was for Morwell East, Traralgon from the bushfires. The elevated levels were really high ones from the mine were on the 15th and 16th. They were the 2 days where we really had elevated levels, really high.
Sorry, in South Morwell.
South Morwell. Oh, across the... Yeah, South Morwell, but we also got...
Because I don't think we have seen those figures yet.
Yeah, so those levels, what we call the estimated levels. Now, at the time...
And those were passed on to the Department of Health, were they?
No, at the time, that data, we were still in the process of trying to understand that correlation and those concentrations. The only data, the data that we did with what we were saying was about alerts, what were the relative concentrations at Morwell East. With Morwell South, the only data we could do in terms of correlating that was to give an indication of what the levels were. That was on the Sunday night on the 16th, where the levels at Morwell East were around about 2.5 to 3 times higher than the levels of Morwell South were higher than Morwell East. And so that gave an indicative number. We were in the of about 255 micrograms per cubic metre, just using the Morwell East data. So we've gone back and we didn't have the data at the time. So we were obviously given some information to the Department of Health about the likely levels, that the levels were high, well above the advisory reporting standard, but there were indicative numbers. So since that, we've gone back and tried to, what we call hindcast, go back, use the correlation data, what did that show? But at the time, we didn't have that data. Apart from those indicative
Can I just ask, if the dust tract equipment had been available and essentially assessed, validated, am I right in thinking you could, in theory, have produced more reliable PM 2.5 results far sooner, could you?
Yeah, we deployed it as quick as we could, ideally. I mean, ideally, and this is the thing I was talking about before, about having the capacity to have that rapid response, having the systems in place, so that when you do put them out, you can automatically have that confidence in the data. So that's, so we were at that stage really trying to get that instrument operating, trying to understand those estimates, provide an indication of those levels.
Mr. Torres, yesterday Mr. Merritt spoke around relying upon your educated and experienced view around driving down to Morwell and just, I think his words were visibility assessment and just, having a look around the area. So we're talking at the moment about the data collection. Do you provide a qualitative professional opinion about what the air quality is and whether there's any health impacts?
No, well, generally what we do is we work within the conventions and methods that we have. So with smoke, we have a bushfire smoke protocol, and in that, on our website in the Department of Health, we work on that using landmarks to try to give an indication of potential hazards. And on that Sunday when I did come down, it was around about 5 o'clock. The visibility was down to less than a kilometre. And we've got a table that sort of guides people in terms of trying to understand those levels. And it was at levels where if you look at the category, it's called hazardous. So it's very high level. So yes, in terms of, it's pretty obvious when you've got a big air quality impact. And to be honest, I'd been to the mine on that Thursday morning, and on that Sunday driving down, that was unprecedented. Unexpected in terms of the level of smoke that was in that mine on the Thursday compared to that Sunday.
So did you then provide a report either to EPA and so just tell me about the chain of command, the chain of communication to Department of Health?
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of work being done on that weekend. Department of Health. There was the Saturday. I suppose you could probably go through. You were talking about that before, but
You go ahead, Dr. Sorry.
Just developing once it was so unexpected that smoke and the impacts, especially when a couple of the CO monitors were starting to read the around the place for the high carbon monoxide concentrations. We were working with Department of Health, who were trying to work along a protocol, trying to understand and develop that carbon monoxide protocol in terms of triggers in an emergency. So when I got involved at the State Control Centre, was trying to support Department of Health in developing that protocol. My role there was to provide any sort of advice in terms of exposure or potential monitoring requirements or assessment. So by that time, in terms of the monitoring, it was about trying to develop the best way we could to monitor the levels of carbon monoxide, because of the focus was on carbon monoxide. So we started to talk to the Fire Brigade about trying to get a carbon monoxide network in Morwell South, and it's Commander O'Connell over the phone to try to talk about where you've got your area raised, can you deploy them to give us this indication to help us to work towards being prepared for this protocol to provide the data. So during that night on the 15th, the Fire Brigade went out and started to try to develop, put out that carbon monoxide network, and that progressed into the next day on the Sunday. So on the Sunday, in terms of providing data, when I got down there about 5:36,
This is Sunday the 16th you're talking about? Yes.
When I saw the smoke, just couldn't believe it. The visibility well below us.
So based on your experience, I mean, what sort of levels of PM 2.5 would have been produced to cause that dense?
I think we're estimating, could be 700, I think. It's very high.
700.
And this is against a standard of 25
Yeah, no, I mean,
micrograms.
I'm saying this probably be, at the time I wouldn't, it's very low. I don't know, we're talking 250, 500, I'm not sure. I mean, I've never seen anything like this before. So I'm really guessing, but 200, 300. I mean, looking at some of the stuff that was coming from Morwell East, comparing the visibility data from the dust track to that, at the time the advice we gave to the Department of Health was it was 3 times higher. Morwell East was reading on a 24-hour rolling average, which is the 24-hour, was 85. To that effect, multiply that by 3, so we're in that order of 250. That's where our estimates. But it was pretty high. And I drove into Morwell as well, just to see how far the smoke had gone. It was definitely, obviously, higher, closer to the mine, but it's still pretty strong in Morwell itself.
So just to summarise, so it sounds like we should be able to get some indicative data for 15, 16 February.
We've done an estimate.
Okay.
So I think one of the things about these incidents, it's really important to go back there, look at the data, what can we learn from it, how can that inform any health studies, because it's really important to understand these, and if there's a gap of knowledge, and this helps it, I think we do that. Even though they're only estimates, but I know our statisticians have a lot of arguments about the way they produce the data, but they've got some estimates. But they weren't available at the time. In terms of, now we go back, look at the instrument, try to come up with a number that we think would be representative of that day.
Can I just finally, just going back to the 13th of February, was the level of smoke the same as on the 15th or 16th?
No. We're talking 2 different situations.
Okay.
I went down to the mine.
Yes, yeah.
And I saw what I saw down the mine. I went down to Morwell, walked, looked at the bowling club. There was smoke around, and there was an impact, and the advisors were there. And that's why we were really keen to make sure those advisors are there, alerting people smoke's going to affect your health. But no, that's Sunday. I've never seen anything like that.
So that it really ramped up on the 15th and 16th, is that?
Yeah, it's really. I mean, the winds. It was the southwesterlies, which was, and it's unfortunate. It seems to be a prevailing wind in Morwell. So it's just pushing that smoke over to the reservoir.
I mean, just to pursue this slightly more, that later on, once South Moor was up and running, there were some high levels recorded then. Yes. But in your opinion, were the levels on the 15th, 16th higher than those levels? Because, without looking at the graphs, I mean, they were in the 200s, even 500s. But this was higher again then.
So we had 3 major events, I believe. they're starting off at the 15th and 16th. That's their peak at the moment. There's some discussion potentially was there anything on the 9th, but that's something I suppose we could talk later on. And then we have another peak at around about the 21st, 22nd and 23rd. So we've got the monitoring in place by then. And then we have the third event on the 26th and 27th. Now in our statement, Claire and myself, in terms of the yesterday, I articulate the number of days that the the advisory reporting standard has actually been exceeded. And so there was 21 days at Morwell South that the advisory reporting standard was exceeded. 7 of those days, looking at the PM 2.5 protocol, were in the category of hazardous, so that's greater than 157. And 4 of those days were in that category of severe.
Extreme? Is that right? Extreme, yes. Yeah.
I mean, that gives you an indication of the levels and the potential of that, the quantity of those.
I mean, the peak of the second episode, according to the data we've got, was 500.
That's a 24-hour rolling average.
24 rolling average. Yeah. But you're saying actually the first episode, 15-16, was significantly higher than that. Yes.
Now, when we compare the in terms of a convention, the advisory reporting standard is on a calendar day. So you've got an advisory reporting standard of 25 from 12 o'clock, and you basically come up with an average and you compare that against. The rolling 24-hour average gives us an indication of what the levels would be like compared to a standard, which is an hourly standard. But yes, I think that's the consequence. You see that there are 3 big ones.
If I can just summarise that, we know this from your joint report, and we'll come to that in a moment, but on one of those 4 days that were in the extreme category, according to your joint report, there was a reading that's been referred to by Professor Catford of 501 micrograms per cubic metre. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, it would have been, I think, well, some of the estimates could be 700, I think, could be.
Or
Sorry, which?
Perhaps we could refer to, this is the joint report that you've prepared with Ms Richardson. Obviously that's not yet in evidence, but we have copies of that and we should distribute that now. It might be the simplest thing. It's not on the system, I don't think. Okay. It's up. Okay. We have it on the screen.
Oh, yes.
The bit that you're referring to is on page 5 of the document. Sorry, no, if we go back a step, it's question C, it's a bit higher up. That's it. Did the level of PM 2.5 exceed the relevant standard during the period? If yes, please provide details of when this occurred and for how long. Just so that we can place this in context, and there'll be some evidence about this shortly, but this is a joint report that you've produced together with Ms Claire Richardson, who is an independent environmental scientist that's been engaged by the inquiry. Is that correct, Dr. Toro?
Yes.
All right. Now, the figures that you were just referring to are the ones that we see there. You were asked the question, did the level of PM 2.5 exceed the relevant standard during the fire period? If yes, please provide details of when this occurred and for how long. The time span that you're there referring to is the 14th of February to the 31st of March.
Yes,
so that's 45 days. So that would seem to include the 15th. Obviously, it includes the 15th and 16th, the particularly bad weekend that you were referring to a moment ago.
Yes.
And as you've said, there are 21 days when the levels exceeded the advisory reporting standard. Of those 21, 7 saw readings in the hazardous category.
Yes.
And these categories are derived from the PM 2.5 protocol that was utilised. Is that right?
Yes.
And then there were 4 days where the levels estimated and measured were in the extreme category, that is greater than 250 micrograms per cubic metre. So that's in excess of 10 times the standard. Is that right?
Yes.
And then on one of those days, even though it's not referred to there, do you agree that the highest reading during that period was 501 micrograms per cubic metre, or do you say there were higher readings than that? That's what I'm trying to understand.
So remember that some of the data on the 15th and 16th was actually estimated several weeks later or months later. We weren't able at the time to provide that information. This is when we go back and start doing the hindcasting.
Yes.
And start looking at those estimates.
Okay.
So what I've tried to do there is try to summarise that on reflection of what that data was at the time.
Right. So just so that we can understand that, on those two particularly bad days, and do I understand your evidence to be that in the entire period, the worst days, in your experience, were the 15th and 16th?
Yes.
The monitoring equipment that was in place at that time to measure levels of PM2.5 was the dust track equipment at Morwell South, and was that it, or was there...
No, there was also the BAM, or the standard method we monitor at Morwell East.
At Morwell East, so that was up and running at that time and fully operational? Right. And so what you're telling the inquiry, as I understand it, is by looking at that fully calibrated data that comes from Morwell East and the dust track data, you can work backwards to get...
At the time, what we did was, because the dust track data hadn't been calibrated to the levels that we were working to,
yes,
we used the Morwell East data, and we used them because one of the detectors we have is a visibility reduction detector, and try to compare the dust track detector to that detector over at Morwell East to come up with an indicative number. Now that indicative number that we provided at the Department of Health was around about the 200. We said it was really around about 80 or 85 micrograms per cubic metre at Morwell East.
yes,
And we were thinking that the way that the instruments were recording, that we had something like about 3 times, so it's about 250 odd micrograms per cubic metre at the time. That's what we were thinking that the concentrations were, as an estimate.
Now, just to go back to a question Professor Cadford asked, I'm not sure that we fully understand what was done with the data, the indicative data that you had on the 15th and 16th from the dust track monitor. Was that provided to the Department of Health at that time? Are you able to help us with that?
I don't think the dust track data was... we were just providing air quality forecasts. So by the time we got to the 15th and 16th, we were doing the advisories, and in those advisories there was graphs and data to indicate indicative levels.
Yes.
When it came to the actual data at Morwell South, it was that Sunday night when I got there. I provided the advice to the Department of Health, just particular concentrations that we were estimating that were likely in Morwell South.
You provided that to the Department of Health, did you say?
Yeah, just indicative numbers of what they were.
What was the form of that information? Was that verbal, or did you...
Oh, no, that was an email.
Okay.
And so, as well as that, there was some information of the carbon monoxide levels that the fire brigade had been... But I think the challenge here was we had a set of data that we weren't quite sure about the accuracy. They're indicative. Like even the fire brigade data, it was very difficult to get the data in a format because it wasn't automatically able to average the data into the numbers, and they were spot readings, and so we had a set of numbers that were basically defined as 5-minute readings at all these locations. And so it varies quite a lot, and we don't really know. We didn't have it in a way that was able to get it, to compare it against the protocol. So what we could do only for Fire Brigade was to basically provide that data, to the Health Department, to provide the data that we did have,
yes,
in the format that we did have,
yes,
but with working with the Fire Brigade and emergency services to come up with contingencies.
Understand. Just want to press you if I could. So you sent an email on the 16th of February to whom?
Would have been to the health department, probably people that was at the regional control centre. I suspect it would have been Vicky Lynch.
Vicky Lynch.
So the health department had. So we were working together.
All right. I don't think we've seen that email, Dr. Torre. Could that be provided? Could a copy of that be provided to the inquiry?
Sure.
All right. Thank you.
And perhaps just in the other 3 peak periods, were there other emails to Vicky? Was that the source of communication?
By the time, the other two, we were furiously trying to get our e-monitoring system, working through with the Department of Health, the protocols, working out the assessment criteria. By the time we got to the other ones, we had a formal reporting system in place. We were sending reports. So we were confident that data that was coming through was the data that we were working towards.
Now,
Sorry.
Just
probably sounding a bit like a parrot now, but your professional judgment then was on the 15th and 16th. This was the worst part of the smoke experience at Morwell, and it was greater than the second peak, which was on around the 21st, 22nd of February. Yes. And just in terms of that qualitative advice to the Department of Health, what were you saying? This is shocking, terrible. This is something we should just monitor. I mean, what was the sort of the tone or the level of concern you were indicating?
Well, it was very, very high.
It was very, very high. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think the numbers speak for themselves. You've got elevated carbon monoxide, you've got elevated potentially you've got smoke everywhere, you're above the advisory standards. People, I mean, and hopefully what was in place was, the precautions that people were aware of and the alerts and advisories. Yeah, I mean, I think it was pretty obvious from just the observations of smoke.
And just to close this off then, if you'd had a calibrated dust track machine available ready to go from day one, you would have been more confident in the quality of the information. So, I mean, certainly looking forwards, obviously that's something that we need to consider.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the recommendations about having an overall state rapid response system in place, so that hopefully nothing like this happens again, but we're able to at least respond appropriately.
this observation, Dr. Torre, is in no way directed at you, but from the perspective of council assisting, the position where there's uncertainty about whether we have this data or we don't is clearly unsatisfactory, and I think those to my left would no doubt be understanding that position, and I'm being told that there is every effort being made to locate the information that we've sought as a matter of urgency, because clearly, as I've indicated to Dr. Wilson, if it's material that needs to be put to witnesses, we don't want to have to recall those witnesses to do that. It's obviously important for Dr. Torre, it'll be important for Dr. Lester as well.
I'm not sure we accept the unsatisfactory qualification, but we're running a for documents as we speak.
The unsatisfactory observation was not directed at any individual, but rather at the state of affairs. Dr. Torre, one last issue about the events of the 15th and 16th, and it concerns those elevated carbon monoxide readings that you're referring to. The inquiry last week heard from a Mr. Kadzikas, who is a Deputy Incident Controller. I think you're familiar with the evidence that I'm referring to. Firstly, can you explain the context in which those elevated carbon monoxide readings came to your attention? Was it on the Saturday the 15th? Have I got the timing right?
Yes. Well, I got involved in the process a bit later. From my understanding, there were some elevated levels. I'm not quite sure the numbers.
Yes.
15 or 20 odd part per million. That was spot testing, I believe.
I think the highest reading that Mr. Kadzikas referred the inquiry to was 50 parts per million.
Yeah, well, but spot readings, it couldn't, yeah.
Yes.
The only thing from my understanding, and I wasn't really involved, was this issue about the 9 part per million. I believe Commander Costicius was talking about a standard
Yes.
that's applied, and I suspect what he probably was talking about there was the ambient air quality objective that's used just for ambient air, which is an 8-hour 9 part per million standard. So it's not really related to I'm not sure, I think that 9 part per million may have been confusion on his part. I'm not sure where he got the 9 part per million apart from that.
Well, he told us, and this is in his statement, that the 9 parts per million was referenced in, I'll get the name of the document right, a Department of Environment and Heritage recommended ambient air carbon monoxide level. And it was particularly called up in the health management plan that was in place, as he understood it, for the incident management team at the fire.
I can't really answer that. The only comment I'll make, well, we do have an ambient air quality objective. It is an 8-hour average, and it happens to be 9 part per million.
His evidence was that there was conflicting technical advice coming into the incident controller about whether the 9 parts per million was the standard to use or whether some other standard should be used for the purpose of determining if warnings should be given to the community.
I can't comment.
All right. He makes reference to a Department of Health toxicologist that was involved in those discussions. Can you assist us at all with who that might have been? All right. Perhaps a matter we'll pursue with the Health Department. The final matter I want to ask you about, Dr. Torre, are some matters that, as I forewarned you, were raised with Mr. Merritt yesterday, and he thought you might be better placed. You've probably dealt with a couple of them. The first concerns a meeting, or 2 meetings, with the Latrobe City Council and the Environment Protection Authority on the 8th of April and the 2nd of September last year. Do you recall attending 2 meetings with the council? There are some notes that have been provided to the inquiry by the council. Perhaps if they could be brought up, please. I think they were tended, I think, were they not? Exhibit number 33. I think it's Exhibit 33, I think. Have you seen these notes before? They've just come up on the screen next to you, Dr. Torre. Anyone draw these to your attention between yesterday and today?
Yeah, there was, yes. I mean, there was a discussion about these notes that were presented yesterday.
Yes.
But I haven't read them in detail.
All right. Do you have a memory of the? Yes. Were you present at both the meetings?
Yes.
All right. The issue that was particularly raised yesterday with Mr. Merritt concerned the Latrobe Valley Air Monitoring Network. If we could just scroll down a little, do you see LVAMN? Is that a network that you're familiar with?
Yes.
All right. Because it was raised at this meeting, or did you have it, or were you otherwise aware of it before it was raised?
No, I'm aware of that because it's part of the data that's reported by the network.
Yes.
Because they've got 2 monitoring stations in Latrobe Valley.
Yes.
And
where are those stations?
And one's at Rosedale South, and
Yes.
the other one's at Geraldine Hill. And they're industry-sponsored stations.
Right. And the readings from those stations are...
they're annually reported.
Yes.
As part of their monitoring program. So Rosedale South tends to do SO2, NO2, ozone, PM10.
Is that a particular facility at Rosedale South? What is it? What's at Rosedale?
It's a monitoring station.
Yes, but is it attached to a particular industry site or?
No, I believe. Well, e-monitoring in Latrobe Valley has been going on for a number of years.
Yes. From
my understanding, it's gone over 20 odd years. There's been 26 odd stations that they've done monitoring around it. There's been the Latrobe Valley Air Quality Airshed Study. Rosedale South was one of the stations that was maintained out of that system, and from my understanding, the rationale was that it was downwind of all the power stations, and so it gave an indication of impacts.
Yes.
And Geraldine Hill provides some of those plumes under certain meteorological conditions where they get slightly higher impacts. So it's part of a network that's been there for a long time, and it's gone down to 2 stations.
What was it initially?
Well, from my understanding, it was the SEC ran quite an extensive network,
Yes.
20-odd stations around the place.
So the concern that was expressed apparently at the meeting by the councillors about a reduction in resourcing of that network seems to be a well-founded concern.
Well, I mean, going from 26 stations to 2, but obviously in that assessment, like all air monitoring networks, it's about what are the impacts, what are we seeing. From my understanding is that a lot of times they were meeting the air quality objectives, and that accordingly contracted. So they move stations around, try to get different results to try to assess those impacts.
Did you understand from the meeting that the councillors were asking the EPA to address that matter, that is the reduction in resourcing of that network? Was that the
yes. But the network's been reduced for a number of years. Yes. The council were very keen to have more air monitoring in Morwell.
Yes. And presumably the decision about the EPA's response to that would not be taken by you. No, that's a decision for others.
It's in terms of assessing an air monitoring program and a decision about what are the priorities. We went to Morwell and to do the monitoring program. It was really initiated as something out of the works approval for the dual gas plant. There were some anomalies in the modelling. So we went down there, did some monitoring to do that, but while we were there too, we wanted to understand if there was any, what we think is the biggest impact in regional Victoria, smoke, to keep that over an extended period of time. So we did that monitoring, assessed that information, compared it to Traralgon. The assessment was that if you take out those peaks for smoke under certain conditions, Morwell, Traralgon was generally representative of air quality in that area.
Yes.
And the other thing with Traralgon is that it's one of our continuous trend analyses, so we can see how air quality's changed in the valley over a number of decades.
I neglected to ask you earlier, but that proposed upgrade of the Traralgon monitoring station so that it could monitor PM 2.5, has that now happened?
Yes,
it has.
Excuse me. Yeah, we were intending to improve our network a year ago or so for PM 2.5. We were always heading towards getting a PM 2.5 network.
Right.
So Traralgon was obviously an area that was high priority. It's in regional Victoria, power stations, but more importantly, there's the smoke that permeates areas, certain parts of the year.
And when did the Traralgon station's capability to monitor PM 2.5 commence? Are you able to give us a date for that?
No. So, it was only recently.
Since the fire?
Yeah. I mean, the intention was to, unfortunately the fire came along, the intention was to have it there earlier.
Yes. You became a bit distracted.
Yeah, unfortunately, it was just a horrible event, really, wasn't it?
All right. Now, the final matter I want to ask you, it concerns the peer reviews that were conducted into the carbon monoxide protocol. We'll probably return to the protocol itself in the joint evidence session. But do you know there were peer reviews into the protocol that were conducted and commissioned, were they by the EPA?
Yes.
Is that right? And were the results of those passed on to the Department of Health? Do you know?
I believe so. I can't comment on that. I assume they were.
The protocol itself was a joint product of the EPA and the Department of Health, so it would seem logical that the peer reviews would also be shared by the organisation.
I would think so, yes. There's so much going on.
All right, I understand. That concludes the questions that I want to ask of Dr. Torre. I think there's some questions by the state.
I'll ask a question first and I'll call.
Yes, thank you.
We heard evidence yesterday from Mr. Poll in relation to the regime that he applied as from the 18th of February, which is I think when you were still down here the second time, did you have any direct link to the Education Department or Mr. Powell? So that anything that he would have decided would have been, in effect, coming indirectly from you?
No. My role on that would have been through the regional command system. So we very much worked through that management response, the AIM system. So we were at Traralgon and we would have been going through that process. So I didn't have any direct contact with him.
And he obtained a report from a hygienist. We haven't got the details of the protocol, but it was then, if you like, a particular regime that was put in place that he operated on, and I gather that was only indirectly as a result of you. Once again, there was nothing that you had directly involved in, but I take it that there are a number of independent air quality people who could prepare that kind of independent report for that situation.
Yes, there's consultants that work there's the ambient air quality ones that deal with those conventional areas, but there's also industrial hygiene.
Could I just ask a couple of quick questions? You commented on the peer review for the carbon monoxide protocol. Did EPA commission a peer review of the PM 2.5 protocol?
Good question. Sorry, I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, we don't have any information that it did, but I'm just wanting to confirm that.
Yeah, they may have been. Sorry, there was it was a team effort. There was a lot of people doing work back at the office, and the program team, the program leader, Gavin Fisher, was coordinating that particular activity.
I'm sort of very conscious the amazing amount of work you and your very small team did in a very short period of time. And you already explained earlier on that, in fact, if you look back 5 years, in essence, you've had a 50% reduction in the number of scientists in the air quality area. If you'd had the same number of staff, would your response have been any better, faster, more appropriate, more helpful?
I think the limiting factor is the air quality program. The air quality program is based on doing the conventional air monitoring. We've got a network of stations where it's said this role about EPA being a rapid response for emergency. We're not really geared up for that. It's kind of like this kind of void to some extent, because we're very much focused on the bigger picture. I mean, we do short-term monitoring for different events, but when it comes to emergency response, it's having the equipment, having the people ready to go. There's a number of different steps.
So obviously there's an equipment dimension, but there's also a staffing dimension in a rapid response capability for the EPA. I think that's what you're saying.
Well, it's just that we're not. It's just the way we're structured and the way we operate.
I understand.
It's way out of the way we operate normally.
Yeah.
I just want to take back in terms of providing information and contingencies. I think it's worth adding something with respect to that night, the Sunday night, when we're trying to get data and working with the Department of Health of protocols.
Sunday the 16th, you're talking about? Yes.
You know, we were working with the Fire Brigade to try to come up with, if we can't have the data in a certain format, what's the best way to try to get that data? And that evening we were talking with the Fire Brigade about trying to send a kind of like once you've got a protocol, one of the issues about a protocol is you have a level, but it's also got to be an operational thing. How does that number, how do you verify those numbers? So we try to put in place a contingency where the fireman that was actually on site at the polling station at the Morwell police station would look at the numbers and have triggers. And so once that protocol had been determined, which was actually less than the 1 hour standard, it was around about the 70, and I suppose that's in, but they would then contact the scientific officer, and then there'll be a regime in place to say, well, where is this concentration? Do we need to verify it? Where are there some safety areas? So there's a whole lot of work being done to try to get those contingencies in place so that we could understand those impacts and then feed that back into the management. That was working with the Department of Health on trying to streamline them or get some clarity around it. So it was quite a lot of work that night, the next day, to firm that up, and then also look at the resources we needed to make sure we could do that better. So it was every day we were trying to continually build so we could build a better and better system as we went along. Because the 15 and 16, to be honest, that came out of the blue.
I understand Mr. Burns has some questions.
Doctor, you've been asked about the provision of information both to the Department of Health and indeed to the board. And you've been asked for some emails with regard to when the information was first provided to Health on the 15th, and you've undertaken to provide those emails. Is that right?
No, the 15th, the emails in terms of some of those impacts would have been more about our air quality forecasting people trying to provide the advisories. So on the 10th, on the 15th, early in the morning, the high-level smoke advisory was given, and then there's a summary of levels that was basically indicative levels of them around the place.
All right. Questions were asked. Professor Catford asked or suggested that material hadn't been provided to the board. Is it your understanding that the board requested a letter of the 19th of May this year of access to all results of air monitoring completed by the EPA, and that was answered by your agency through the government solicitors on the 22nd of May? Yep. Yes, I tendered that letter. With regard to information that was provided, were you also providing information to the incident controllers on the spot?
Yes.
What was the setup about that? Was there someone from your agency sitting with the incident controller?
Yeah, we had a structure in place. So we had an emergency management liaison officer at the time, an MLO, and they were very much active with I think the health department and other incident controllers. Now on the 15th, our MLO at the time was Tim Bessel-Brown, so he would have been actively involved in that incident management activity.
And was that helping the incident controller to interpret the data they were receiving as in real time?
Oh, I don't know.
Well, your emergency coordinator sitting with the incident controller, what was their role?
I think they were trying to understand the impacts, trying to work out what the levels were around, providing any support that we could provide, feeding that back into. We had people at the State Control Centre as well, who was actually working with what was needed, what did we need to develop, what clarity, I believe. So I think the emergency incident management, you get a lot of input and people are working through what their role is and what support they can provide.
Mr. Merritt, the former CEO of your agency, was asked about the absence of a national standard in relation to PM 2.5. Is it your understanding that there's a process in place and that's well on the way to achieving a national standard now?
Oh, it's very close. There's been quite a lot of work done in the last couple of years in really developing that standard, and it's quite a lot of work. There's still a bit of work to be done, but there's been a significant amount of work done recently.
Professor Catford asked of Mr. Merritt whether he thought Victoria should take a lead role and impose standards on a state basis. What's your view about state-based standards as against national standards?
No, I think that the national process is really important to abide by. I mean, one of the principles of the national process, the National Environment Protection Measure, is this notion of equivalent protection. If states, one of the issues that the NIPM was developed, we had different standards across different states. Like you'd have a high standard for SO2 in one state because for particular reasons. And the other thing too, a national standard also provides the funding to do the research and really develop the standards well. So I think the national approach is really the way to go.
It was suggested that because the standard was advisory only and not a nationally enforced standard, that no prosecution could be envisaged in relation to that. Is it your understanding that that people are prosecuted on the basis of a breach of their licence and conditions can be imposed on the advisory standard on the licence?
No, the licence is a completely different issue. When you talk about a licence, it goes through another process. It's, for instance, if you have a licence and you have a stack, there are emissions that are limits are determined, and that follows a different air quality impact assessment. So if you look at the policy, we have in our air quality management policy a whole lot of design criteria. And in a licence, you've got to meet these design criteria to ensure you're meeting policy and that there won't be detrimental effect to the environment. So it doesn't really, the advisory standard in terms of those licensing really aren't related. The advisory standard is more about the general ambient air quality of a particular area and the objective that you're trying to achieve with that. And that would encompass a whole lot of activities to try to improve the air quality, like the Tasmanians focus a lot on the planned burning, not the planned burning, but the wood heaters. Look at it in Australia, it could be diesels, combustion sources. So that's what the advisory standards are.
All right. You've given some evidence about the desire for your agency to have a greater rapid response capability, is that right?
What I'm doing is I'm just describing the way that our e-monitoring program is doing, and that not necessarily my organisation, but there needs to be a statewide approach to how is rapid response under these emergency systems done effectively.
Yes, and in that vein, it would be better if the situation was that the EPA had greater rapid response capability. Is that your evidence?
Well, it's more. I suppose it comes down to in terms of an agency to provide some report. But I think whose role is that to provide that rapid response? I mean, that's and who's equipped to do that?
Right. Do you know if there's in a review of the Hazelwood mine fire, has there been an assessment of new equipment that needs to be purchased?
Yes. In terms of our monitoring program, we are looking at very much on deployable equipment, investigative studies. We're looking at trying to add that another dimension to our air quality assessment, and our program leader Gavin Fisher has done quite a lot in that area. I believe we've purchased a travel blanket, which is really just a dust track in a box. But just to provide us a way of assessing impacts.
So you understand a travel blanket has already been purchased, or at least the commencement of that process is
definitely in the process. I know we've gone down the track that Gavin's been negotiating a system that meets our needs, because we see that also as a potential tool for just our regulatory role, trying to understand impacts around our industry or some other things.
Deputy Incident Controller Kat Sekas has given evidence about the process in relation to the carbon monoxide protocol that developed during the course of the weekend of the 15th and 16th of February. Did you have any involvement in that?
Yes. I was involved at the State Control Centre. Department of Health were working through that protocol, and I provided some assistance in terms of just environmental monitoring, exposure, duration, consideration that needed to be considered in developing some of that protocol.
The evidence from Mr Katsikas was that the decision was taken by the incident controller to rely on the advice of the Department of Health in consultation with the EPA before any further warnings were issued in relation to carbon monoxide. Did you have involvement in that process?
From my understanding, that there was quite a lot of interactions at the State Control Centre working out what's the best way to progress. I didn't have any detail on that specific point.
You recall discussions about that?
There's a lot going on.
Not specifically?
Well, I mean, I think what happened was once the protocol was starting to be evolved, I started to turn my attention about, well, how can we go out and assess that? And I started to talk to the Fire Brigade about, well, what contingency with the MLO back in Terralbin can we create this carbon monoxide monitoring network?
You were asked by Mr Rosen what standard were you applying to assess the level of carbon monoxide against. Your answer was that we weren't really using a standard, but I want to take you to your statement of the 16th of May 2014 at Table 1, below paragraph 7. Do you have that there?
Sorry,
your first statement, below paragraph 7 at Table 1.
No, because if you look at the standard, So are we referring to just the spot tests?
You're asked by what standard were you assessing the results against?
Well, yeah, okay, so you're talking about carbon monoxide?
Yes.
Yes. See, this is the issue, that when you're trying to assess an ambient air quality standard, it's an 8-hour average.
Yes.
And you take a spot test.
Yes.
What that does, it just gives you an indication. It basically tells us, is there carbon monoxide or is it high? It gives us indicative numbers. When you're trying to compare against the standard, that's why we go to the trouble of putting a monitor in there that meets the standard, provides the data in a format that gives you the ability to assess it against the criteria.
In having regard to the assessment of those spot checks, were you also having regard to the state environment protection policy noting an 8-hour standard of 8 parts per million? Of 9 parts per million. Were you mindful of the state environment protection policy and that level of 9 parts per million over 8 hours?
Yes, that's yes.
I want to ask you about access to laboratories to get priority analysis of samples. Is there sufficient access to laboratories to do that?
Well, I think it's sort of like I think from my understanding in terms of laboratories, there was a challenge at the time. Are we talking about the water samples and the sediment samples, or are we talking about the air samples? Because we used a number of different laboratories across different set of samples to New Zealand.
Mr. Merritt touched on this in his evidence. Are you satisfied that there's sufficient access to laboratories?
I think there was an issue from memory. I recall that some of the laboratories were trying to get urgent results during the weekend, and so there was quite a lot of negotiation to try to get laboratories to do the samples in as quickly as possible.
Are there now agreements with more laboratories?
Oh yes. I mean, that's what really stems from an emergency incident. You try to find ways of trying to do the work that you have to do.
The last thing I want to ask you about is it's a question the chairman asked you, was with regard to the evidence of the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development. Mr. Pole gave evidence yesterday about the decision to relocate schools in South Morwell, that is south of Commercial Road. Your evidence was that readings in that area were 3 times higher. The air quality readings were 3 times higher with regard to air pollutants. Is that right?
Yes, we're talking at the time, when I'm talking about 3 times higher, I was referring to on the 16th, when we're looking at the data compared to on that event.
Yes.
They were 3 times higher compared to the measurements that were taken south at Morwell South compared to Morwell East.
Yes, and the decision to relocate the schools was taken, occurred on the... now, you weren't involved in that, I know, but that was taken on the 20th of February, 4 days after you'd noted these readings that are 3 times higher than East Morwell. Is that right?
Yes.
On that basis, is the decision to relocate the schools south of Commercial Road, does that have some scientific basis of doing so?
I'm not aware of the information that he had to make that decision.
Well, he's indicated that he relied on EPA information.
I'm not sure.
You're not aware of the decision, but in any event, you'd say that that area south of Morwell had it was clear from the science that area that was the area that had the greatest difficulties.
Yeah, and that's why we're monitoring, and that were the messages we were getting.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Doctor.
I've no further questions by the examination, and I'm perhaps in Dr. Torre's hands. Do you need a break, Dr. Torre, before the concurrent evidence session, or are you happy to press on?
Press on.
Happy to press on. Is the board happy to press on? Because we're obviously under some time constraints. In those circumstances, I'll call Ms. Claire Richardson. There may be a slight delay in Ms. Richardson. Perhaps a 5-minute break might be advisable in the circumstances, unless we're prepared to wait.
I suspect we'll take, once we take a break...
I'm concerned about that. It won't be 5 minutes.
It's always hard to get a prompt resumption, so I think we'll just wait.
Please state your full name.
Claire Marie Richardson.
Please repeat after me. I do solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm
I do solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
to this Board of Inquiry
to this Board of Inquiry
will be the truth,
the
whole truth,
and
nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Afternoon, Ms Richardson. Could you please, for the purpose of the transcript, state your full name?
Claire Marie Richardson.
Ms Richardson, you have been engaged by the inquiry to provide us with independent environmental science information.
That's correct.
And you have provided us, in response to questions that were asked of you by the inquiry, you've provided us with 2 reports.
I have, yes.
They're actually described as statements, so perhaps I'll use that terminology. The first statement is dated the 26th of May 2014.
The final version of that statement was dated the 29th of May.
Thank you. And have you had an opportunity to read through that statement this morning before giving evidence?
I have, yes.
Right. And are there a couple of, or in fact I think it's just one typographical error that you would like to amend?
That's right. There are 2 occurrences of the word date that should be data in the
Right.
document.
I know one of those is in paragraph 31. Perhaps if we go to those on page 20.
That's right, it's at the end of paragraph 31.
Paragraph 31, the last line,
That's correct.
you would change the word date so that it reads data.
That's correct.
And the other location in which that happened, I don't... Bear with me a moment.
Or perhaps that was in the other statement.
I think it might be. So there is a... Perhaps before we go to the other statement, with that change being made to your statement of the 29th of May 2014, are the contents of the statement true and correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yep. And where you express opinions in the statement, are they opinions that are honestly held by you?
They are, yes.
Yes, I'll tender the statement of the 29th of May.
39.
In response to some further questions that were asked of you by the inquiry, did you provide a supplementary statement dated the 30th of May 2014?
I did, yes.
And are there 2 changes that you would ask to make to that statement?
There's actually an additional change that
Right.
I've picked up having listened to Dr. Torre this morning.
Can you direct us to the part of the statement where that is, please?
In Table 1, on page 9 of 30,
It's the occupational exposure criteria.
that's correct. If we look at column 4, so going from the left-hand side of the page, we go across to column 4, we have a heading NEPM air toxics, ADSTR and TQEC.
Yes.
I understand from Dr. Torre's evidence this morning that the units of measurement for those parameters in column 4 should read micrograms per cubic metre, not parts per billion.
So the first entry is actually on page 10 of the statement for magnesium.
That's correct.
So where it says 95 parts per billion, it should be 95
Micrograms per cubic metre.
micrograms per cubic metre. and we also make that change wherever we see parts per billion in that column.
In that column,
that
that's
entry,
correct.
only in that column. Thank you. Is there also a typographical error in paragraph 16? The third line, the word date appears again.
That's correct.
That should be data.
That's right.
Perils of spell check. And on page 25, just beneath paragraph 46, the reference to Morwell East in the footer to figure 1 should be Morwell South. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yep. With those changes being made, is the supplementary statement dated the 30th of May 2014 true and correct?
There's one further paragraph that I understand from discussions with Dr. Torre yesterday may not be strictly correct,
Yes.
and that relates to the requirement to locate an ambient air quality monitoring station in the Latrobe Valley. I understood from discussions with Dr. Torre yesterday that, strictly speaking, on the population guidelines in the NEPM, that it wouldn't be necessary for that to be in place.
Can you direct us to where that paragraph is?
That is paragraph 30 on page 16 of 30, where I state that based on the population in the Latrobe Valley, a single performance monitoring station is required. I understand from Dr. Torre it wouldn't be required based on the population. However, the EPA see the significance of the valley in terms of pollution and elected to site a monitoring facility there anyway.
Okay. Could that concern be addressed by inserting the words not necessarily between is and required? Would that satisfactorily meet that?
It would, yes.
Okay, is not necessarily required. With those changes, are the contents of the statement true and correct?
They are, yes.
And once again, the opinions expressed are opinions that you honestly hold?
I do, yes.
I'll tender the supplementary statement, separate exhibit, I think, perhaps.
That'll be exhibit 40.
You have attached to your supplementary statement, and perhaps also the first one, a detailed CV. I think it's only to the supplementary statement. Perhaps if we could just briefly go to that. It's Appendix A to the supplementary statement. You have qualifications, Bachelor of Science with honours from the University of London.
That's correct.
You have a postgraduate diploma in air pollution control. Where did you obtain that qualification?
That was also a qualification I studied in London.
Yes.
And it was under a curriculum defined by the Royal Society of Health in the UK.
You're a member of the Clean Air Society of Australia and New Zealand. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And you, under the heading Gas and Particulates Research, Measurement and Prediction, you have undertaken research projects in a number of areas related to the subject matter of this inquiry.
I have undertaken research into particulate matter,
Yes.
but mainly from mining sources, not necessarily from fire sources at mines.
Right. So from controlled emissions, is that right, as opposed to uncontrolled emissions, or is that not the distinction we should be making?
It could be described that way, yes.
All right. I noted the first dot point there, research project to determine emission rates of PM 2.5 particulates from emission sources at open cut coal mines. When did you engage in that research project?
That was commenced, it would have been around about the year 2000.
Right. And which particular open cut coal mines were you concerned with?
There were a number of participants. One of the mines was operated by BHP in the central Queensland Bowen Basin. That was called Peak Downs. And then I measured also in the Hunter Valley. It was a mine site operated by Coal and Allied. I think it was called Hunter Valley No. 1, but the names have changed over the years in the Hunter Valley.
Right. Now, I can't leave your CV without asking you something about a publication or paper that you delivered. This is on the very last page of the statement, page 4 of the CV. Looks like a paper to the Queensland Environmental Law Society, so it's the 4th dot point under the heading Papers and Publications. Environmental Monitoring Science or Black Art was a paper that you presented. What was your conclusion, Ms Richardson? Science or black art?
A mixture of both.
Okay. Very diplomatic. Now, if I could... I can relate to that as one who's newly arrived at trying to understand the science of environmental monitoring. Now, before leaving documents, I'll ask you about your statements in a moment, but have you also, pursuant to a concurrent evidence protocol determined by the inquiry, have you also participated in a concurrent evidence process with the gentleman to your right, Dr. Torre of the EPA?
Yes, I have.
All right. I'll ask you to have a look, firstly, in fact, to ask both of you to have a look at a document headed Expert Witness Concurrent Evidence Protocol. Copies for them. Firstly, Ms Richardson, can you confirm that the document that has just been handed to you is the protocol that guided the discussions you had with Dr. Torre?
Yes, this is the document that we followed, yes.
Yes, and on your part, Dr. Torre, even though you're described as Mr. Torre there, this is the document that also guided those discussions, is that right?
Yes.
All right. And the second document I'll ask you to have a look at is headed Joint Report of Ms Claire Richardson and Dr Paul Torre, 2nd of June 2014. I think it's attached to the first. And is that a 4-page report that you jointly produced as a result of those discussions?
That's correct, yes.
That's a yes from both. I'll tender the protocol and the report as one exhibit.
Yes, that'll be Exhibit 41.
In the protocol that is now Exhibit 41, you were set certain tasks under heading 3, which were to identify and discuss technical issues concerning air quality in these proceedings, in the inquiry, to reach agreed opinions on those issues, if that is not possible, to narrow the issues in which there's disagreement between the two of you. Thirdly, to identify those issues on which you agree and disagree and summarise your reasons for disagreement on any issue. And finally, to identify what action, if any, may be taken to resolve any of the outstanding issues that remain. And you were asked to produce a joint report being guided by that process, addressing the 6 matters which are set out under heading 4, Joint Report. Just ask that both of you understood that was the process you were engaged in.
Yes.
Dr. Torre?
Yes.
All right. If we can turn then to the joint report, and if we can work our way through it, and for both of you, but particularly perhaps Ms Richardson, if there are matters in your statements that you particularly want to take the inquiry to in relation to these issues, then please indicate what those are as we go along, and we'll bring those up. So the first question you were jointly asked to consider, do you consider the appropriate ambient air quality monitoring standards, do you consider that the appropriate ambient air quality monitoring standards were used during the fire period? And in your joint report you identify there were 2 sets of standards, the ambient standards and the response standards. Ms Richardson, can you just explain the difference between those two? What are you referring to?
The ambient standards are the standards setting the SEP ambient air quality. which reflect the national standards in the National Environmental Protection Measure, also for ambient air quality. And these are the standards that are set to protect the majority, if not all, of the population, and they're used to guide both policy and research into the way we manage emissions, both in the state and throughout Australia. So the intent is that they signify, or exceedances of these standards signify where we need to do more investigation, and that they are the point at which there could start to be health impacts on some portions of the population.
Perhaps if we can just bring up from your first statement, page 9, please. I know the same table appears in your first statement, Dr. Torre. Is that what you're there referring to, Ms. Richardson? Those standards, you're asked to identify the standards for certain particular pollutants. Is that right?
That's correct. So that the reference in the joint report to the ambient standards is a reference to the standards that are presented in Table 1A.
Yes.
But then also in Table 2, where they're also adopted in the Victorian State Environmental Protection Policy.
Right, and one of the differences we see, correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's a reference to particulates as PM 2.5 in the first standard as an advisory reporting standard, but not in the Victorian table. Is that right?
Table 1B has the advisory standard, so that is something that was incorporated into the National Environmental Protection Measure in 2005,
yes.
Subsequent to the development of the original standard in 1998.
Can you just explain that to us? What was developed in 1998? What's
so
standard?
Table 1A has the NEPM ambient air quality standards and goals. Now, those standards were developed and implemented in 1998. At the time, we had very limited knowledge about particulate matters smaller than 10 micrometers,
yes.
Although there was some evidence starting to appear that it could be an issue. So at the time, the research community was trying to gather evidence and information about the finer particulate matter. Over time, as some of that evidence emerged, the National Environmental Protection Council decided to review that information, and on the basis of that, they implemented a change to the original 1998 NEPM to incorporate an advisory reporting standard for PM 2.5. The view at the time was there was still insufficient evidence to enforce this as a health standard in Australia, but the intent was to ensure monitoring was undertaken by the various EPAs so that the information became available to link to health studies to then determine whether or not it should be incorporated as a national criteria.
Right, we go back up to Table 1A, please. In the fourth column, excuse me a second. Excuse me, Mo. You indicated that the goal at that time was to gather data to inform the development of a standard.
That's correct.
What's the opposite of an advisory standard? A mandatory standard.
A mandatory standard, yes.
Right. And can you inform the inquiry about what progress has been made since that time? Because it seems like a long time to be.
There has been a significant period. Many of the EPAs around Australia have been monitoring PM 2.5, not necessarily at all of their stations, but certainly at some of those stations. So data has been provided or is now available in Australia. Also over that time there have been many, many studies overseas, and so international researchers have also built up a very large body of evidence relating to PM 2.5.
Yes.
There was a recent review, I think it was in 2013, by the National Environmental Protection Council as to the status of the current knowledge of PM 2.5 as well as a number of other aspects relevant to the current NEPM standards. And one of the conclusions of that review was we now have sufficient evidence that the PM 2.5 advisory standard should be implemented and perhaps even reviewed in terms of its applicability. And more recently than that, just towards the end of April this year,
Yes.
there was an announcement gazetted by the Commonwealth Government that the NEPM standard is to be amended to incorporate a regulatory requirement for compliance for a PM 2.5 standard, and that there will also be amendments to the PM10 criteria in the NEPM.
And what's the likely time frame for those developments? Is that in the gazettal notice?
The gazettal notice doesn't state the time frame, and I'm not a member of the committee that reviews this information. Perhaps Dr. Torre would have more information than I do.
That sounds like an invitation, Dr. Torre. Can you enlighten us further about that? Firstly, do you agree with that background information?
Yes, I do.
And what's the current state of play as of April of this year? Are you aware of those developments that Ms Richardson's referred to?
Yes, very much. It's been a work in development for quite a bit of number of years.
Have you been involved in that process personally?
In aspects of it,
Yes.
In terms of just providing some scientific advice or evidence. Eco Victoria has been actively involved in that process. Our policy people are probably better placed in terms of the process.
Yes.
I can't really say, but there's been a lot of work. I don't think it's too far away. It's definitely it's very close from my understanding.
And this is a question directed to either or both of you, but is it your present understanding that when the mandatory standard emerges, it will be set at the same levels as the advisory standard, or are the standards likely to be different?
The gazettal states that there will be standards implemented, but it doesn't necessarily state that they will be the ones that have been adopted as the reporting standards.
Just so that we're clear, from the table we can see the advisory standard is 25 micrograms per cubic metre averaged over 1 day, and 8 micrograms per cubic metre averaged over 1 year. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes.
How do those levels compare to mandatory standards in other countries, for example in the United States? Perhaps Ms Richardson, we could start with you.
Yeah. In the United States, the 24-hour average is higher at 35 micrograms per cubic metre, and the annual average is also higher at 15 micrograms per cubic metre. Similarly, in Europe, there is a higher annual standard, but their 24-hour criteria is the same as the one that we have adopted in Australia as the advisory reporting standard.
25 micrograms.
The 25. China has recently mandated that they will also be implementing particulate standards. As we're aware, it's rather a polluted country at the moment.
I think the citizens of Beijing would be pretty happy about that.
Yes, it's not mandated to become law, I believe, until 2016, but they are going to adopt a 24-hour average of 75 micrograms per cubic metre and an annual average of 35 micrograms per cubic metre. So we can see there is some variance in those standards, and perhaps if we look at the criteria proposed for China, that there is obviously some appreciation that they would have difficulty meeting a much more stringent standard at the moment.
Does the literature indicate that there is a safe level of exposure to PM 2.5?
The literature supports the view that there is no safe level.
Which therefore, do you agree with that, Dr. Torre? That's the
literature. I do.
And that obviously raises questions about how one goes about setting a standard. What are the sorts of considerations that are taken into account where the literature says no safe level? You've got to set a standard that assumes a safe level. What are the considerations that are taken into account by those that set such standards?
I might ask Dr. Torre to respond to that, as he has a role as a regulator.
It's definitely a challenge. There's a whole lot of consideration in setting these promulgated air quality standards, and,
yes.
and they involve, regulatory impact assessments. They take into the social impacts. They take into the health impacts. So it's quite a number of different factors. The notion of no safe levels is obviously considered in that whole process. But there are standards across the world. But it is a difficult concept to understand.
If we can turn then from the ambient standards to the response standards, that was the second matter that you considered in answering the first question. You jointly note the response standards were based on advice from the Department of Health, and the standards were developed during the fire, which was challenging, and they were a work in progress. You were involved in the development of the response protocols, Dr. Torre. Obviously, it is challenging to develop those on the run in the course of responding to an emergency. Do you agree with that proposition?
Oh, yes. Yes, it's. I think that there wasn't a protocol there, so that was developed as the need arose.
You both make reference in your statements to contrast that position with the bushfire smoke exposure protocol, which Dr. Torre, I think you were particularly involved in the development of that in Victoria. Over what period of time was that protocol developed?
Well, that protocol sort of started, I think, after the 2006-2007 bushfires. So over a period of time was coming up with that protocol over those years. And more recently, we also agreed with that protocol. More recently, we formalised the more recent protocol.
You say that it's pleasing the standards were able to be peer reviewed in such a short period of time, but you go on to state that the response protocols overall should be reviewed with a focus on both the adopted thresholds as well as the appropriate operational responses that are triggered as each threshold is exceeded. And upon completion of the reviews, the protocol should be finalised and adopted for future events. I want to ask you about that. In your second statement, Ms Richardson, at paragraph 52, it's on page 26.
Yes, I have that.
Yep. You note that extended emergencies relating to industrial type emissions and fires are less common than bushfires, which is what you've previously been talking about. You say, as each of these types of incident has unique characteristics, for example, air pollution type, concentration, exposure risk and variability of emissions over time, it is neither practical nor appropriate to develop incident-specific protocols in advance. There seems to be a bit of a tension between what you're suggesting in the joint report and the observation that you can't develop in advance a protocol for every likely contingency. Would you like to expand on that, please?
Yes, I mean, that's correct. In an emergency incident, there can be different emission sources involved. We can have chemical spills, we can have fires at different types of industrial operation. And so each incident is unique from that respect. However, there are some commonalities that we can try and address in a broader protocol. And from that perspective, I do believe it's appropriate to continue to review the protocols that were developed for the Hazelwood mine fire, but they would have to be in a broader sense perhaps than specific to the fire, so that they would have some value in the future for other incidents.
Dr. Torre, would you like to add to that? Or?
Yes, I think one of the things about the protocol is also the operational responses. Having a trigger level alone, you need more. How do you operationalise that trigger, and how does that work out through an incident?
Yes.
So that was one of the learnings I think we learned as we went along, is that you have a protocol, but then how do you actually activate it in an operational sense?
Just to be quite specific about that, what you're talking about is you've got a particular reading. What are the consequences of that for the public health officials? What do they say to the community
I'd
that he ought to do?
Yeah, and also, exactly. And the whole gamut of things, working through how is that taken through an incident, what are the considerations, what are the options. There's quite a bit of working and learnings in that, in terms of getting that to that part of it. Yeah. So it's the whole way that protocol would be used and actually implemented in a response.
Just in relation to that, the inquiry's heard evidence from a number of witnesses who've talked about the unique characteristics of the Hazelwood fire. Unique from the perspective of for the firefighters, for public health officials that had to give advice, and so on. Do either of you have any observations to make about that evidence that the inquiry's heard? Was this a unique event in world terms or even in Australian terms?
I would think so. I think that those carbon monoxide levels were very unusual. Never seen carbon monoxide levels at that concentration. Not that I've seen a lot of coal mine fires, but I was really surprised at the elevated levels. Even when we tried to do a correlation between the particle levels and carbon monoxide, we couldn't find any pattern. It was really such a different fire, and we were carbon monoxide levels I've never seen before.
These are the levels on that weekend of the 15th and 16th of February you're talking about, or otherwise?
Just generally from the fire. See, with carbon monoxide in fires, we don't necessarily get such high levels. It's,
yes.
I think it was this particular fire itself and the way the coal was burning and the poor combustion. I'm not quite sure exactly what was leading to that, but one factor could have been that brown coal's got a lot of water, and in that combustion process, it was creating that incomplete combustion in carbon monoxide. But that
yes.
was really unique in that level of carbon monoxide.
Ms. Richardson, anything you can add to that?
I agree in general with Dr. Torre. There were some unusual circumstances associated with the fire. We do have a fair amount of monitoring information from Australian coal mines where we have the phenomenon spontaneous combustion, but clearly this fire was quite different to those sorts of events. So the existing data set we have does not relate to the sort of emissions that occurred during the Hazelwood fire. But in terms of the duration, initially I thought the duration was somewhat unusual, but as I've reviewed the literature, I see that certainly bushfire events do occur over extended periods of time. So perhaps we should be better at dealing with these longer-term events based on our experience of bushfires, both here and in other countries such as the United States. So there is experience about longer-term exposures as we experienced in this event, although the characteristics of the emissions were probably quite different to anything that we had experienced before.
I think the term of art is a campaign fire. We have campaign fires in Victoria that can run, not just in Victoria, but I'm familiar with ones in Victoria that can run for weeks or even months. Yes. Is that what you're thinking about?
That's right, yes.
In fact, Dr. Torre, was it the campaign fires that led to the bushfire smoke protocol, the ones in the Alpine region?
Yes, exactly. The 2006 and 2000 we had extended smoke across Victoria for several months.
Yes, I think it was.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't remember even Melbourne being fumigated during the December-January period. So that went for a long time.
Just before we leave the question of the response protocols, are there overseas protocols or protocols that are in place overseas that can assist in the process that you recommend, which is the reviewing of the protocols with a view to having them in place in the future? Perhaps Ms. Richardson, if I can start with you.
Yes, there are certainly protocols adopted in the United States that I have reviewed. In fact, there was a copy of an extract from one of them attached to my second statement. And certainly they've been developed to deal with wildfire incidents, as they call them in the States. So they would have relevance from a bushfire perspective, but we would need to determine how relevant that would be in Australian situations and to different types of fire or different types of incident. I have found very little relating to responses based on CO concentrations, so that there was nothing available to inform the development of that protocol, as far as I'm aware anyway, during the incident.
Just in relation to that attachment to your statement, I think it's up on the screen now. Is that what you're referring to? Table 2 in your second statement?
That's right, yes.
And it seems to refer to two measures, that is AQI. Can you help us with that acronym? Air Quality
Yes,
Index?
That's Air Quality Index. And that's a measure that is based on a range of parameters. It isn't just particulates, it's a number of other parameters as well. Those include things like ozone, nitrogen oxides, sulphur oxides.
And we see the AQI values, and then on the right-hand side of the page we see the PM 2.5 24-hour average, and as the levels go up, so too does the response. Just applying the figures that we know from your joint report were recorded in Morwell during the fire, and perhaps you talk about 4 days that were in the extreme, what you refer to as the extreme category, that is greater than 250 micrograms. Applying this table, that would, if we can go back to table 2, please. That puts us into the second highest category, does it not?
That's correct, yes. The first hazardous category,
yes,
which relates to PM 2.5 24-hour averages of 250 micrograms to 350.
And the corresponding health advice here is to trigger health warnings of emergency conditions. The entire population is even more likely to be affected by serious health effects. It's very general, would you not agree?
It is very general, yes.
And to be more helpful to a community, advice about whether they ought to not engage in outdoor activities or in fact relocate and so on is the sort of information you'd want to see, wouldn't you, for a protocol?
That's correct, and certainly both myself and Dr. Torre agreed that in the review of the protocols that were developed, that was key information that would be of benefit to include in finalisation of those protocols.
Yeah. And from my perspective, is there are quite a number of alerts, advisory, contact a nurse, don't do exercise. I think what we're sort of recommending here is to go into that and look at that in a bit more depth. And is there anything there that could provide some more insight? Because there is quite a bit already that advice in terms of trying to deal with these situations.
Thank you. I won't ask you anything specific unless you have something to offer about question B, the location of the air monitoring stations. I think your positions about that are clear, that the best data was from the Morwell South location. We can go over to question C, and you've already dealt with this. That is, you were asked whether the levels of PM 2.5 exceeded the relevant standard during the fire period, and if so, give details, and you've set those out there. Just to give us some perspective, I'm going to focus on the 4 days that were in the extreme category, that is readings of higher than 250 micrograms per cubic metres. From your collective experience, how high are those readings? Are they unusually high, or have you experienced readings like that in other settings? Particularly the highest of the readings, which we understand to be 501 micrograms per cubic metre.
We don't have a lot of PM 2.5 data compared against other events. And so we're still trying to find out if there is... I know that Andy, my colleague, who's a data analyst, was looking at visibility reduction during the 2006 and 2000, and he did come up with an interesting statistic where there were the odd hour, when you looked at the visibility reduction, that in the Wangaratta area, that was getting close to that, but that's visibility reduction. It's not a PM 2.5 measurement per se.
Right.
So we don't have the PM 2.0 data from other incidents to compare.
Okay. Ms Richardson, can you expand on that at all?
I haven't seen any data from Australia that suggests or confirms that those values have been exceeded. But again, that's probably to do with firstly the lack of monitoring data to date, but also where the monitoring stations are positioned that are currently recording PM2.5. I have seen some data from overseas that suggests that those sort of values are reached, for example, in China, in some of the developing countries. They're normally associated with meteorological conditions that allow the build-up of air pollutants, particularly in cities. And so there is data available suggesting that there are communities in the world at the moment that do experience those concentrations from time to time.
Could I just ask, which are the 4 days you're referring to there?
Yes, that would be the 15th and 16th, and I believe it would be the 21st and 22nd.
Could I ask then about the 26th and 27th? In the summary graphs we've got, it would appear that there were 2 days that exceeded 250. If I'm reading the graph correctly.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's what you're reading there, I think, is the 24-hour rolling average. The data here that's been presented is the 24-hour calendar day average compared directly against the advisory standard. So we have two reporting systems. One is to give us a 24-hour rolling average to give us an indication of what the likely levels are on an hourly basis, because we don't have an hourly standard. But when we do an assessment against an advisory reporting standard, we use the calendar day from 12 o'clock to 12 o'clock to do that.
So I just find that a little bit confusing, because I think you said there were 3 peaks and you've given us 2 days for 2 of the peaks. What about the 3rd peak? Did that not count?
Sorry, when I said 3, I meant there was 3 events.
Yes.
There was, well, it depends on the concentration. So the concentration for that 3rd peak was, it was below the 250. So that's been captured in that 7 days. So there's 21 days overall. We talk about exceeding the advisory reporting standard. 7 days are within that 157 and above, and then 4 days, which is greater than the 250, based on those categories in the protocol. But in saying that there is data there that's estimated. Both estimated and measured.
Am I understanding it correctly, Dr. Torre? The 7 days, the ones that exceeded 157, would incorporate the 3 peak periods. The 4 days, obviously only 2 of those peak periods. And is that the 15th and 16th and the 21st and 22nd? Are we correct to understand?
Exactly. It's 21st and 22nd, or 22nd and 23rd, I believe.
So in the period 26-27, there wasn't an occurrence over 250 micrograms of cubic metre for a calendar day. I must say that the graphs don't seem to suggest that, so perhaps we could just ask you just to confirm that.
Well, we have got 2 graphs. We've got a calendar day graph, and we've got the 24-hour rolling graph.
Right.
So
I'm not sure we have the calendar day graphs.
Professor Catford, if you could bring up the graph that if you could indicate to us the graph that you're looking at, and we could have that on the screen. That's from Dr. Lester's statement, isn't it? Does it have an attachment number or document number there? I don't immediately have it at hand.
I think, though, it's also in your statement, isn't it, Ms. Richardson? That PM 2.5...
The rolling average is on figure 1, which is page 25 of 30. That's the data I have plotted. It isn't the data from Dr. Lester's statement.
And there's also on page 22 of 27 of your first statement. Yes. I mean, there you've got the 2nd and 3rd event, but you haven't plotted the first event. And it would seem to me that there were sort of exceedances. Well, I'm asking you, were there exceedances over that 250 trigger for the 2nd and 3rd event?
yes, the 2nd event, yes. The 3rd event, I think when we do the calendar day, depends on the hours, it must come underneath the 250.
There was for the rolling average, there were 3 hours on the 26th that exceeded the 250, and then that ran across from midnight to 1 a.m. with the balance of the exceedance occurring on the 27th, and that would have affected the 24-hour midnight to midnight calculation. So because the exceedance occurred across midnight, that will have affected the number of days then calculated as exceeding.
So could I just ask you, why is a calendar day so important, not a 24-hour?
Very much that's why we do the rolling 24-hour average, to indicate that. It's just, that's the regulatory process that we operate under, so that when you do a kind of like an audit for the air quality against the advisory standard, that's the protocol that's in place in the convention rules. So to say how many days has exceeded an objective or standard, you say X amount, and this is the form that you use. That's why we've actually done both. Right that concept.
So just to clarify, are we going to be getting a copy of the calendar graph?
Yes.
Could we be provided with that, please?
Just before leaving that question, I want to ask you about the use that can be made of the Traralgon P10 data. This is something, Ms Richardson, that you refer to in your first statement, I think it is, at paragraph, starting at paragraph 29, under the heading Health Impact of Recorded PM 2.5 Levels. That's it. As I understand what you're saying there is that because the Traralgon monitoring unit was recording readings from the 9th of February onwards, and we don't have any data at all from Morwell in those first few days of the fire, it may be possible to make some estimates of the likely PM 2.5 levels on the 9th, 10th, 11th and 12th of February based on the Traralgon PM10 data.
Yes, that's right.
I understood that. And you say specifically at the foot of paragraph 36 that you could estimate the readings in Morwell based on the relationships with data from the other monitoring stations and other available data sources.
That's right.
Does that refer to the same thing? Have you been able, and I know you haven't had much time, but have you been able in the time available to have a go at doing those estimates?
To prepare those estimates requires a fairly detailed level of statistical knowledge, and my level of statistical knowledge is fairly basic. The additional data Dr. Torre went through with me yesterday from the dust track monitoring position for the 16th of February suggests that we had a peak on that date of somewhere around about 750 micrograms. Now, if we included that data in this graph, we could see then that we have 3 peaks, and we're starting to build up a better picture statistically of the way the trends in the data. To then calculate through the possible concentrations on the 9th of February, the only data we have is for Traralgon.
Yes.
I've completed a very basic correlation of the Traralgon PM10 data with PM 2.5, and that resulted in a correlation coefficient of around about 0.7, which suggests there is a relationship in the data. It isn't a perfect correlation by any means, but suggests that there is a reasonable correlation. A statistician with sufficient knowledge could, on the basis of that correlation and the PM10 data from Traralgon, take account of variables such as the weather patterns at the time, the patterns and the relationships in the data set between Morwell East and Morwell South, and then back through to Traralgon to make some estimates as to what the PM 2.5 could be at Morwell South on the 9th, when we see that we have a PM10 peak of 100 micrograms at Traralgon.
Anything, Dr. Torre, you can add to that?
Yeah, it's possible. I think we might have a look at that. We'll have a look at that. bring that up earlier. I thought, yeah, that's an interesting point. Because we did use Terrelbin to base us, to give us an idea of the bushfire impact,
Yes.
on the following day. But yeah, look, we'll have a go at that. I know what we'll come up with, but yeah, we'll have a crack.
I think
Sorry, that's our old CEO.
I think that's welcome. Just before leaving that, if you take into account that figure 2 that's up there on the screen, we see the reading, and I think looking at it, that looks like on about the 25th of February, that peak reading of 500 micrograms, if I'm reading that figure correctly. Did I?
It might be 22. Because that's 21, 22 is when we get the bigger peak.
Okay.
It is difficult to read.
Did I understand, Ms Richardson, that you said that from discussions yesterday there were peak readings of 750 micrograms earlier on the 16th of February?
Yes, that's correct, based on the corrected dust track data
Right.
that was referred to earlier by Dr. Torrey.
Okay, so if that was plotted on this figure, that literally would be off the chart.
Yes, that's
Yep.
right.
Yeah, that's to say it was just to correct, it was 700.
Yes.
And that was very much done under post-analysis. We didn't do that. We worked that out only. This is an estimate.
Yes.
With quite a lot, many weeks after the incident.
I understand that, but I think you told us earlier that your personal experience told you on the day that you were in that sort of vicinity. Is that fair to say, or was that it was very high?
It was high, but trying to the visibility to put it to a number.
Yes.
You're talking about a 24-hour average. So I drive through, I see an event, I see quite a lot of smoke. It's well below the 1 kilometre. I know that 500 kilometres is quite a lot of smoke. What that equates to, in terms of a number, I couldn't say.
I understand. But that's a peak reading in the vicinity of 30 times the advisory standard, if one does the maths. Have I got that right? If it's around about 700, 750?
Yeah, I think we estimated, it's an estimate.
Yes.
Around about 700.
Returning then to your joint report, you were asked some questions about the levels of carbon monoxide. This is question D. Did the level of carbon monoxide exceed the relevant standard during the fire period? If yes, please provide details of when this occurred and for how long. You say, for the valid data available, there were 3 days in Morwell South that the levels recorded exceeded the ambient air quality standard, 21, 22 and 26th of February 2014. You then go on to refer to unvalidated data from the CFA, suggests the ambient air quality standard is likely to have been exceeded on 15 and 16 February as well. That's the data that the inquiry's heard from Mr Katsikas about. Is that right, Dr Torre? Do you understand that the CFA was conducting readings on that weekend?
Yes, but the CFA, when they were doing those readings, they were taking spot readings, so
yes.
Fluctuating quite a lot. What these ones are, that we didn't have the data at the time, was we've gone back and downloaded that data off their instruments and then try to work out an average so we have the right average.
Yes.
So what Commander Katsikas was given at the time with that 5-minute spot reading?
Spot readings, yes. And what are the figures that are being referred to there? When you've gone back and done the work, what were the CO readings on those days? Can you tell us?
That's depending on the site. I think it varied. We had 2 sites on the 15th and 5 on the 16th. High teens, 20s, 30. I can't recall.
I don't want you to guess. Is there a document in which that's recorded that you've seen?
Yes, we've got an internal document that we've been compiling in terms of summarising our estimated data.
All right. At the risk of sounding like a broken down record, I'm not sure if we've got that data. Those to my left, I think, are saying that we do. So that's if you're able to clarify whether that's been provided, we'd appreciate it. Next question you were asked, what steps, if any, do you consider could have been taken to improve the ambient air quality monitoring in and around Morwell during the fire?
The first thing you both say, and this is really what you've said to us earlier, is that the EPA air monitoring program is not designed for rapid response air monitoring. In not having this capability, it did not have access in-house to appropriate portable instrumentation to enact rapid deployment to measure the ambient air quality initially. That's something that you both, if I can go to the first of your recommendations under heading G, you jointly recommend the development of a statewide rapid response capability for air quality monitoring and assessment in Victoria for all significant incidents involving smoke. There's a reference to the Californian Air Response Planning Alliance, which provides an example of a similar response. Ms Richardson, that's something you're specifically familiar with? You refer to it in your report?
Yes, I do, yes. And it's a protocol that was developed in California in response to, I won't say a similar incident, but an incident that had some characteristics that would be similar to the one that we're dealing with. There was an extended period of exposure. There were attempts to complete monitoring. The experience was that the information was not provided to the community within an appropriate time frame and in a way that allowed them to make decisions about their health status and the actions that they should take. And in response to that, a multi-agency charter agreement was formulated, and the multi-agency group has drawn up protocols for monitoring that includes a number of positions that would be recommended for different events, and the types of instrumentation to use, and then how that information is communicated to the community. And they also try to ensure that monitoring instrumentation is available to allow those actions to be put into place very, very quickly in the event of a major incident occurring. And it was really intended for wildfire response, but equally it could have applied in the circumstance that we're dealing with.
The inquiry has before it a document, Exhibit 37, I think it is, Wildfire Smoke, a Guide for Public Health Officials, July 2008. I think that's a document that we've asked you to examine as part of your preparation for giving evidence.
I have reviewed that document, yes.
It's up there on the screen. That's a separate document from the one that you've just been referring to?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. This document is more akin perhaps to an expanded protocol,
yes,
such as the bushfire protocol, and it goes through a number of steps and procedures that can be followed. The organisation that I'm talking about is specifically designed to focus on air monitoring and that capability, and then providing that information to the community.
So, just quickly go to the table that's in this document, which is at page 31. Have you looked at this as part of your examination? This is the table that sets out the trigger levels and responses, recommended actions.
I did review that, yes, and have a look at that.
Do you have any observations that you'd like to make about it?
One of the key differences to the bushfire protocol and the Hazelwood fire smoke protocol that was developed is that they also incorporate trigger thresholds for 1 hour values, and that's one of the key differences. The other key difference is that they adopt the position that whether or not it's PM 2.5 or PM 10 that is high, the criteria will apply to both. So what that means is if you only have monitoring for PM 10, you still apply the thresholds. If you have both PM 10 and PM 2.5 monitoring data, you apply the thresholds to whichever is the most stringent. One thing I did notice from this protocol, it doesn't necessarily tell you the time period over which you would then determine specific actions, such as evacuation, and so it doesn't necessarily give us that guidance.
Dr. Torre, is there anything you'd like to say? It's probably not a document that you've seen before today.
I think that's the purpose of the recommendation, to review this.
Yes.
And try to develop it, and develop it for an Australian setting rather than just Victorian.
Yeah. Perhaps it's appropriate time to turn to your recommendations.
I wonder, just before you do that, Mr. Rosen, just in terms of acute periods of very high levels of PM 2.5, I mean, it's brought out in this protocol. Could you just explain what the 24 rolling average is, and particularly during a 24-hour period, what would be say, the maximum level of a PM 2.5 that might have been detected in the Morwell fire? Because presumably you're averaging out low and higher levels, and you're smoothing it in essence. But presumably there were very high levels of PM 2.5 detected in a shorter time period. Do you know how high, say, a 4-hour exposure might have reached, or a 2-hour, or 1 hour in this case?
I do recall, you're talking about just a 1-hour average?
Yes, or, if you can show any light. I mean, so, within a 24-hour period, let's say, take this one where we had 500, that's over 24 hours. Within that, presumably there are times when it was lower than 500 and above 500. And, so my question is, how high did it actually go in a shorter period of time?
I believe, stretching my memory, I think we may have got an hour result around about 1,300.
1,300, yeah. And presumably that might have continued for... Yes, well, we'd be grateful to actually try and get an idea of the range within these very high levels. Yeah.
I've got to go back to the data.
Thank you.
If we could turn then to the recommendations that you make, a couple of which we've already addressed. This is G of your report. So we're very grateful that between you and the short time that's available, you've come up with 6 recommendations. We've dealt with the first of those, the development of a statewide rapid response. From your experience interstate, particularly in Queensland, Ms Richardson, is the Queensland EPA, does it have that capability? Do you know?
I haven't worked in any of the EPAs, but certainly my understanding is that both in Queensland and New South Wales, the focus is, as Dr. Torrey has explained, the focus is on the setting up and operating monitoring stations to determine compliance with the National Environmental Protection Measure Protocol. And because that is a regulatory requirement that is imposed on the states, the focus of their monitoring capability is towards that type of monitoring, which is using fairly expensive and very high quality instrumentation that takes some weeks, sometimes months to install and operate. So I would be somewhat surprised if Queensland and even the New South Wales EPA had the capability to deploy instruments such as dust tracks, portable CO monitors in a rapid way in this sort of event occurring.
I think you say, don't you, and I'm not quite sure where the paragraph is, Ms Richardson, but that in your perspective a reasonable amount of time to be on the ground doing those preliminary monitorings in an event like this is about 24 hours, you think is a reasonable time for an environment monitoring agency to respond to an emergency like this?
That's based on my own experience.
Yes.
I'm often called out by industries that have had incidents on their premises and where they're looking for monitoring to be completed quickly so that they can ensure that both their personnel and the community is not exposed to excessive concentrations. And in those sort of circumstances, we're asked to provide and install equipment very, very quickly, and generally we can achieve that the next day if we have the instrumentation available.
Yes. And that's obviously the big if. I'm wondering if there isn't scope, maybe Dr. Torrey, a better place to respond to this, for some interstate cooperation so that the various EPAs, in the way you informally were able to access material from Tasmania, the various state bodies jointly put resources into having this rapid response capability so that it could be deployed interstate if need be.
Look, I think all options should be considered.
Yes.
And really, that's what happened in this fire. The fire brigade actually sourced, when the Morwell community monitoring started, they started sourcing area arrays from Queensland and even from the United States. So, yes, I think all of those options should be considered in terms of rationalising and making resources available. I think one example is the oil spill. You know how they have different centres for responding for big oil spills?
Yes.
And it's located around Australia, and they all get those resources when they need it. It's a great idea.
That could be a good model for this. We've dealt with the second of your recommendations, which is to use a panel of experts
to review the carbon monoxide and PM2.5 protocols with a view to developing agreed levels on a sort of generic basis that could be deployed in future events. Recommendation... Sorry, Dr. Torre.
It's not just carbon monoxide and PM2.5. It's also, just the required emergency protocols per se. I think we need to keep it not just to CO and PM2.5,
yes,
but are there other emergency protocols or things that we can learn and apply in emergency events?
Now, I'm very conscious of the time, and we can all read the four further recommendations that you make, but I invite you to, if there's anything in particular you want to say about those recommendations, that to further explain them. Perhaps I'll start with you, Dr. Torre. Is anything you want to add to those remaining recommendations?
Just the rationale behind the statewide smoke harmonisation plan. One of the practicalities of that is really that smoke really is prevalent in Australia. Bushfire smoke, burning smoke. It's probably one of the biggest air quality impacts, pollutants. And it's very hard at times to get away from the smoke in regional Victoria or regional Australia. And there's quite a lot of good work in terms of triggers and advice and protocols, and we saw that in Morwell South in terms of the health departments and the education departments trying to come up with protocols in place that are planned and they can roll out when we do have these incidents to minimise harm.
Yes.
Because sometimes you can't stop smoke no matter what level it is, and go inside a building or respite and all that. And it's really got to be, as we find here, through the Morwell South, you really need to have systems in place, and you've got to have you've got to have all the networks working together, and the best way to do that, I think, is to minimise harm, because smoke is just part of Australia.
Ms. Richardson, anything further?
The only thing that I would say is that it's incredibly important that the community feels that they have the power to monitor for themselves,
yes,
and that some of these recommendations we've made are to provide alternate ways where the community can then take a measurement that is reasonable. It isn't necessarily accurate in the sense of the monitoring that perhaps the EPA would complete, but it has enough validity for them to inform their own actions and to make choices about the way they behave when there are high air pollution events. In similar ways that we get cards that advise us what to do in a bushfire emergency, we could have some sort of system that allows some basic monitoring to be completed by individuals, with an understanding then of how they can react and respond to the levels that they have determined.
Thank you.
I just had one very short question about your modelling capability, Dr. Torre, and I think we're all very impressed with the level of science and expertise you have. I mean, the reason we're seeing these fluctuations at Morwell is principally, and just correct me if I'm wrong, because of the wind direction. I mean, the mine is producing these pollutants. Okay, the firefighters may be varying that, but it's shoving it out. And depending on where the wind blows, communities are hit by that. Is that? So,
it's not just the wind, yes, obviously, but there's also, what we were finding in scenarios was it was also during those light wind periods,
yeah,
and we were getting inversions.
Yes, yeah.
And so it was sort of bubbling over.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what I'm alluding to, that in terms of anticipating where the smoke will hit and its intensity, is it possible to actually conceive of a forecast modelling system where you can predict where the smoke is going and the intensity, in the same way I think we're very impressed with the fire commissioners' forecasting of where the bushfires are going to hit and the intensity?
Yeah, there's two comments I make. That one is that during the mine, we try to source as much modelling as we possibly can. The Bureau of Meteorology have got a smoke model, so they provided us, but the CFA have also got a hazmat model called Argos, and there was quite a lot of ingenuity in trying to work out where those plumes are. So in terms of coal mine fire, it's worth developing and trying that, and that we will try to use that. But in a bigger sense, there is quite a bit of research now being done by the CRC bushfire, and one of the roles there is trying to understand and get better at bush smoke, at smoke modelling, especially from fires, so that they can manage where a lot of that activity is. And it's quite a exciting piece of work that hopefully in the next 2 years it will involve a number of universities and the Bureau of Meteorology to be able to develop the capacity of forecasting that more accurately. Yeah, so it's definitely in the pipeline. I think it's a very exciting time. We've actually lost a colleague to that research project after this fire in terms of modelling bushfire.
Members of the board, I note that it's 1:10. Mr Burns tells me he's got 2 minutes of questions.
I know that we can just extend the hour.
Yes.
Maybe a bit away. I think I'm good.
That will then complete the evidence of these two witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly, first question to Ms Richardson. You described 24 hours as being the appropriate time at which you thought it would be reasonable to be on the ground providing a response. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Has your company ever been called into a major environmental hazard?
Not on the scale of the Hazelwood mine fire, but I have been called into one incident where a major inner city building in the Brisbane CBD was evacuated, and the emergency services were there, and I was called to complete monitoring on behalf of the organisation that owned the premises that had caused the incident.
And in that circumstance, did you know exactly what you'd be monitoring for?
We understood that it was volatile organic compounds.
And how many people attended?
I went myself.
Right, so you were able to effectively load up your car and go?
Yes, that's right, yes.
So does your reference to 24 hours being reasonable, does that obviously depends on the availability of equipment?
Absolutely, yes.
It depends very much on the size of the equipment?
You would normally use smaller equipment that would be portable for this sort of monitoring, but the issue is really having that equipment available and having it in service, if you like, so that it's been calibrated to the extent that you know it will be reliable when you take it out on site.
Yes. My question is a different one. It's about the size of the equipment. Obviously, if it takes trailer loads to get it down there, it's a bigger task, isn't it?
That's absolutely right, but that's why you wouldn't necessarily use that sort of equipment in an emergency situation for a 24-hour response. You generally use smaller instrumentation that is truly portable and wouldn't require a large trailer to transport to site.
And that relies on the availability of that equipment.
That's absolutely right.
The capability to respond quickly.
Exactly, yes.
It also depends, doesn't it, on whether the equipment is calibrated to those specific circumstances and what you're searching for.
In some respects, yes. Certainly in the incident that I was involved in, we had the capability of taking out sample devices that could both screen for the VOCs and then take samples that could be subsequently analysed to look for a wide range of compounds. In the situation of particulates, instruments such as dust tracks can be available. Even if you don't specifically calibrate to the source, they give some indication as to what the impacts are. And as Dr. Torres has done, subsequently you can then calibrate if you have other reference instruments available to complete that calibration.
Yeah. And when you're doing that, subsequently it takes time?
Yes, it would do, because you need to match the data up to determine that correlation.
Thank you, Ms Richardson. Can I just ask you, Dr. Torre, when were you first contacted to provide, for the EPA to provide assistance to the incident controllers?
I was contacted on the 11th.
Yes, and when did you arrive on site to give that assistance?
On the 12th.
Yes, and when were you providing your first information to assist the incident controller?
I would have been providing information probably by the 13th.
So it's a day later. Yeah. In those circumstances, Ms Richardson, what do you say about that? Reasonable?
In terms of Dr. Torre being called out and then giving data, yes. But my concern is that we have no data earlier in the event when the larger impacts could have occurred. And perhaps our recommendations address that issue in terms of having a monitoring system available that could be deployed more rapidly.
When you say earlier in the event, you understand he wasn't contacted till the 11th?
That's right. The deployment of monitoring is not necessarily the sole remit of the EPA. Certainly in the situation that I was involved in the Brisbane CBD, the hazmat unit of the fire brigade had also completed VOC monitoring before I entered the premises, and they would not let me enter the premises until they were satisfied that it was safe for me to enter.
Yes. You understand the fire only started on the 9th?
Yes, I do, yes.
Nothing further. Oh, excuse me, one question. Oh, yes, Mr. Chairman. Earlier, I tendered a letter. It wasn't given an exhibit number. The letter from the VGSO to the board, dated the 22nd of February. Could that please be given an exhibit number?
Just treat that as part of the Tory statement.
Yes, happy for that to occur. The emails have now been provided. I understand that were sought from Dr. Torre earlier. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I should just say, by way of clarification in relation to this letter, with the letter came a CD that had a large amount of data on it. We have had some difficulty identifying which of the specific data we've called for is on that CD, and it does appear that the readings taken from the CFA's handheld CO monitors were not on that CD, and we've been unable to identify data prior to the 20th of February from the dust track. But what we propose to do is to have a discussion with our learned friends over the lunch break and try to identify what we have and what we don't have, and I'm sure there's a way through.
Yes, well, we'll adjourn now to 2:15.